Hey, what's up? It's Cute What If. This side. Today we will be seeing what if Deku was reborn with dragon wings. Before we move ahead with the FIC, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future what ifs like this. In a basement somewhere, several boys of about 4 or 5 years old lay bound to hospital beds. Most looked lifeless, some shivered with fear. They did not know how they had come to be there. The next thing they remembered was waking up trapped in that room. Midoriya Izuku, the green-haired boy and son of the pro-hero dragon, was among them. He came from a wealthy, noble family. He was terrified but could not cry or shout. The drags in their bloodstream had dulled his pain and heavier emotions. Katsuki Bakugo, the blonde boy beside him and the son of a powerful family that owned fashion companies, weakly asked Izuku if he was all right and warned that this time the medicine felt too strong. His voice trembled with the fear that Izuku might not survive the daily torment. Katsuki was terrified at the thought of losing his childhood friend. Izuku answered that he was okay, only tired, and that the binds made his body stiff and sore. He offered a small, sad smile meant to reassure. Katsuki urged him not to sleep and insisted that Izuku keep talking, asking to hear him at least once every 5 minutes. None of the children could see one another. Their vision had stopped working, likely the effect of a quirk. Nearby, Todoroki Shoto, hair split white and red and eyes of different colors, listened and felt a sharp, unexpected envy. As the son of Endeavor, Shoto had been kept apart from his siblings since his quirk awakened and had never had friends. He longed for the warmth and closeness he heard in their exchange. The basement door opened and 3 men entered. The one in front had the air of a mad scientist. The other 2 bore tattoos and carried weapons at their hips. The scientist commented with a malicious smirk that of 20 children, 13 had been reduced to empty shells while 7 still retained their mental strength, and he sounded oddly surprised that so many had survived their treatments. A colleague asked what to do with the children who were effectively empty shells. The scientist ordered them to be killed and disposed of, his laughter making the 3 boys shiver. When another colleague asked why the children had been given so much medicine, the scientist explained that the injections were intended to make the recipients capable of handling multiple quirks. He said he had given 15 doses so the bodies should withstand 6 or 7 quirks. The boys could not see his face, but they felt the murderous intent in his stare. He announced that with their bodies prepared he would administer a final serum to make them submit. Additional men appeared behind the first 3. They moved through the room, silencing and removing several of the already broken children with swift, grim efficiency. The room fell eerily quiet as those children were carried away. The scientist went on to explain that the medicines came from another doctor and contained 5 bioartificial quirks. Once injected, the serums would enter and transmute inside the body, allowing those quirks to manifest. The idea of such an impossible combination stunned the boys. Then the scientist observed the 7 remaining children and revealed that he had only 5 doses of the final serum. He declared that 2 of the children would have to be removed. Fear rippled through the group. Inside their heads, Izuku and Katsuki pleaded silently for each other, but the drags prevented them from calling out. The scientist noted that 2 of the children showed almost no emotion and seemed only to be breathing. He asked for their names. One colleague identified them as Haruka Sai and Kirigaya Hatsu, sons of lesser-known pro-heroes. The scientist dismissed them as useless and ordered them disposed of. He selected Midoriya Izuku, Katsuki Bakugo, Todoroki Shoto, and Kyosuke Mori as the most useful and added Watari Rei to the list because he had survived the heavy treatments. The men moved quickly. There were sudden, terrified cries as Haruka and Kirigaya were seized and removed in a swift, brutal action that left the room filled with anguished sound. Tears ran down the faces of the surviving children. Moments later, the cries ceased and a heavy silence settled over the basement. Although they could not see, Izuku, Katsuki, and Shoto knew from the sudden stillness that the 2 children were gone. Izuku felt a strange mix of sorrow for the lost boys and a guilty relief that his friends were still alive. It was as if guilt and death no longer reached him. Bakugo felt the same about his best friend. He was relieved that it was not his precious friend taken and sensed no remorse for the other children's fate. A colleague smirked and reminded the group that the operation had begun with 50 subjects but that the number had dwindled to 34 after the 7th dose, continuing to shrink with each successive injection. The Mad Doctor asked how to distribute the serums and wanted to know which quirks belonged to the subjects. The informant listed the quirks. Watari possessed a healing quirk, Midoriya had a fire-breathing ability, Bakugo could create explosions, Todoroki controlled a half-cold half-hot power, and Kyosuke had an elemental berserk quirk. The doctor worked through the logic, noting 2 serums seemed angel-related, 2 demon-related, and 1 dragon-related. He decided the dragon serum should go to Midoriya because his quirk was dragon-related, the demon serums would fit explosion and elemental berserk, and the angel serums would go to Watari and Todoroki. He selected the dragon-related syringe and approached Midoriya, injecting it into his arm without warning. Midoriya convulsed as intense heat and pressure rushed through him, sensations of his body reshaping and reforming. Katsuki heard his friend's agonized voice but could not move to help because the 15th dosage had left him immobilized. Tears filled his eyes at his inability to act. The doctor moved on and administered an angelic serum into Watari, and the boy cried out in pain. He finished the rest of the injections. Each subject felt something emerging within them, a strange force they feared might destroy them. Silence fell over the basement for a moment. The doctor laughed maniacally, declaring 3 of the 5 had survived, and stepped back to observe. Midoriya sprouted majestic blue-feathered wings, Bakugo manifested red demonic wings, and Todoroki grew white angelic wings. Their eyes filled with anger. A fierce glow flared as they lunged toward the researchers. One man reached for a gun, surprised when Bakugo moved with impossible speed and took the weapon first. The boys' bodies seemed driven by an overwhelming instinct to survive, overriding restraint. In an instant, Bakugo used the gun and fired. Midoriya unleashed scorching fire, and Todoroki sent forth freezing energy. Their combined assault overwhelmed the research staff. The room fell silent, the team neutralized by the trio's sudden, uncontrollable power. Unexpectedly, a nearby wall shattered outward in a burst of light that momentarily blinded the 3 youths. That bright light felt, in that instant, like hope. The informants drew a rescue team. A woman with dark blue and pink hair, Tsutsumi Kana known as Lady Nagant, told the assembled heroes that the informant had indicated the location. She checked on her youngest trainee, 11-year-old Takami Kigo, whose red wings identified his fierce wings quirk. He had trained under her and, despite his age, had earned the title of the youngest hero with the hero name Hawks and the exclusive code name Mammon. Kigo affirmed his readiness and unfurled his wings. Lady Nagant signaled the charge. The heroes burst through the wall, but there were no villains waiting, only 3 4-year-old boys with wings of different colors, standing, staring without obvious expression. Lady Nagant examined the scene closely and noticed signs that firearms had been used during the incident. Based on the evidence, she suspected the blonde boy had handled a weapon. She wondered how the shots had not been heard and considered the possibility of soundproofing in the facility. As the heroes approached, tears began to fall from the children. One green-haired boy expressed relief that someone had finally found them. Their wings vanished, and the 3 children collapsed, unconscious. At the hospital, Lady Nagant gently placed a hand on Katsuki's head while looking at the other 2 children on adjacent beds. The scene was devastating, and even Kigo could not bring himself to meet their eyes. Lady Nagant concluded this appeared to be a quirk-related crime, the result of illegal quirk research and experimentation. She felt pity for the survivors. Kigo asked whether the children had been responsible for the earlier violence. Lady Nagant confirmed that, based on the evidence, it seemed so. She explained they needed to identify the children and that, if the commission had prevented the parents from being contacted, the heroes would have to take custody and care for them to keep them from falling back into villain hands. Kigo looked uncertain, and Lady Nagant recalled, privately, how he had once confided that he wanted a little brother. She arranged for Bakugo and Midoriya to be brought with her and ordered another hero to take Todoroki into custody. She also foresaw that the commission chairman would be eager to protect the organization's reputation and might keep this case tightly controlled, given the high casualty rate among the kidnapped children, many of whom were the sons and daughters of prominent families and heroes. Lady Nagant felt a heavy sadness for these children. They had been kidnapped and used as test subjects, and now they were to be handed over to the Commission, which felt like another kind of hell. Lady Nagant opened the parked car and placed 2 of the children in the passenger seat, followed by Todoroki, who was supported by a hero. Lady Nagant recognized the boy as Todoroki Shoto and realized he was the son of the number 2 hero. She wondered what the Commission would do about that. She also recognized the green-haired boy as Midoriya Izuku and understood that he was the son of the pro-hero dragon. The case would be troublesome if it leaked. It involved not only the son of Endeavor but also the son of an American-Japanese hero. The Commission would not let these children go easily. Lady Nagant exhaled heavily. At the Hero Public Safety Commission, Midoriya Izuku stirred and whispered, instantly alerting the boy beside him. He woke on a soft bed and stared at an unfamiliar white ceiling, completely unlike the ceiling of his home or the dark basement where they had been held. Kigo watched him carefully and smiled, explaining that they were at the Commission and that the staff would take care of and train the 3 of them. Katsuki Bakugo had already been awake, pacing and waiting for any sign that his friend had recovered. He had been filled with anxiety and fear ever since Izuku had cried out in pain when an experimental serum had been administered. The memory of that cry had left him shaken, as if he had nearly lost Izuku. Katsuki walked back and forth while Kigo remained near the bed. Todoroki Shoto, the other survivor, waited quietly alongside Katsuki. He and Katsuki had been talking since they had woken, and Todoroki had already seen how much Katsuki cared for Izuku. They comforted each other in small ways when the worry became too much. It had been 5 days since they had regained consciousness, and Katsuki's fear had only grown. He trembled and his eyes filled with tears. Todoroki stayed by his side and tried to soothe him, using the same gentle reassurance his sister Fuyumi had once offered. They were not close at first, but in a few short hours they had become friends. Katsuki blamed himself, sitting outside Izuku's room and replaying everything that had happened. He whispered pleas for Izuku to wake and cover his face in quiet sobs. When the door opened and Kigo stepped out, Katsuki moved toward him without hesitation. Kigo smiled and nodded, and Katsuki rushed into his friend's room. Izuku looked fragile but awake. Katsuki stared for a long moment until his eyes overflowed, then he ran forward and hugged Izuku tightly. Todoroki stood close, offering a steady presence as the 3 of them held on to one another. Izuku held Katsuki tightly, hugging him as if he never wanted to let go. Shoto smiled at the scene and watched them. Izuku stammered, asking what had happened. Since waking up he had not received an answer. Katsuki sobbed softly and told him that he had been asleep for 5 days. Izuku blinked at that, then assured them that he was all right and smiled in the gentle, innocent way that Katsuki had longed to see. Katsuki wiped his tears and loosened his grip. He said that Izuku had to meet someone. Izuku asked who that would be. A boy with heterochromia and half-colored hair walked into the room and stepped toward them, saying he thought the person Katsuki meant was himself and identifying Izuku as Midoriya Izuku, son of the pro-hero dragon. Katsuki chuckled at the arrival. Izuku returned the introduction by recognizing him as Todoroki Shoto, son of Endeavor, explaining that he remembered the name and background from the basement. This was their first time meeting in person. Shoto admitted that he had been shocked to learn there were many other children like them who shared the backgrounds of pro-heroes and fell into step beside Izuku. Izuku asked what had happened to the person who had made them suffer, since he could not recall anything before waking. Katsuki and Shoto fell silent. Neither knew how to answer a question that might break Izuku's tender heart. Shoto looked down, struggling with whether to tell him, and then trailed off. A brief pause followed as they gathered themselves. Katsuki hesitated, remembering Kigo's earlier remark that they had killed them. He closed his eyes, unsettled by what he had just admitted. When he opened them, he stared at Izuku, who remained surprisingly calm. Izuku acknowledged that he understood and that he had killed someone, and he asked Katsuki how he felt about it. Katsuki said that people were claiming he and the half-haired boy had killed many villains. He had wanted to capture them, not kill them. He sighed heavily. He did not feel guilt over the villains who had tortured them. Instead there was a grim satisfaction he knew was not heroic, but he no longer cared. Izuku said he did not know how to feel. He felt both sadness and relief, relieved that they were both alive, and he looked down at his hands. A pause hung between them. He felt the same relief that someone else had survived. The other man also appeared untroubled by the recent battles. That alignment meant Katsuki, Izuku, and Shoto's emotions complemented one another. Each had lost a particular sense of remorse or guilt. The woman with dark blue and pink hair expressed delight that the new princes were awake, and he gently patted the head of the winged companion. A short, neutral pause followed as everyone took in the moment. They did not know the reason why they were being held there. Izuku and Katsuki might have cared because they had loving families, but Shoto was especially curious. He wanted to see his mother and siblings. Lady Nagant explained that it would be difficult for them, but the commission wanted them trained under her and Kigo. All three boys had acquired a total of 6 quirks, and the commission did not want any mistakes while they learned to use them. They would not be allowed to meet their families unless the commission permitted it, but she reassured them that they would be treated well. Izuku felt sad but tried not to show it. With his father a pro-hero, he assumed his mother would be taken care of. Lady Nagant then told them the commission planned to declare them dead. To her surprise, the 3 boys nodded in unison, their expressions hard and distant. Kigo watched them with a gentle smile and immediately felt an unexpected closeness to the boys. Lady Nagant reintroduced herself as Tsutsumi Kana, known as Lady Nagant, and presented Takami Kigo, known as Hawks. Shoto asked what they should call them. Lady Nagant suggested he could call her master, and that Kigo could be regarded as a brother. Izuku and Shoto replied with gentle smiles and used the suggested forms of address. Katsuki remained silent. He did not care what he called them. In private, Katsuki had thought to call Kigo something foolish, but since they had been rescued by them, he reluctantly accepted calling him Brother Kigo. Kigo was pleased to be called brother. The authorities announced that Izuku, Shoto, and Katsuki were dead. Their families were stricken with grief, but they did their best to continue living. The official report gave only a surface account. The bodies of kidnapped children were said to have been found near a villain headquarters and transported to the morgue. The public was told that no one had survived. The case became known as the Future Genocide, a serial assassination of future leaders and heroes. It spanned not only Japan but also other major nations, and it marked a historic defeat for heroes and the commission. Behind the scenes, Kigo and Nagant trained the 3 boys, and the commission watched them with interest. Kigo felt a quiet satisfaction at training them, since all 3 shared a wing quirk similar to his. 4 years later, Lady Nagant compiled an overall background review of the boys. Todoroki Shoto was described as cold, dense, lacking common sense in some ways, hardworking and kind. His quirks included an inborn half-cold half-hot that produced fire on his left side and ice on his right, with limits still unknown. He also possessed a life force ability that could drain and manipulate life energy. If fully drained, a target could die, and Shoto gained vitality from it, making him effectively very difficult to kill. His angel's gift allowed him to manifest a halo and angelic wings, heal himself and others at will, and bend and manipulate light. He could teleport anywhere he knew the coordinates for. His property configuration quirk allowed him to control the properties of non-living objects, including atom-level manipulation and extreme temperature changes. His angel wings granted flight, the use of feathers as blades similar to hawks, and the ability to form a light shield. Overall, he was dedicated, regarded Kigo as a true brother, and was affectionate toward Izuku and Katsuki. He had the heart of a true hero and was considered an exceptional talent, ranked SS+. Bakugo Katsuki was described as bad-tempered, cold, prideful, rebellious, and independent. His inborn explosion quirk allowed him to generate explosive force from his sweat and shape it as he wished. He developed a demonic gift that manifested demonic wings, horns, and tail, enabling curses, darkness manipulation, and shadow transformation. His demon wings could be controlled for feather manipulation and to produce a dark protective shield. He could teleport to known coordinates. His temperature manipulation allowed him to change the temperature of objects or areas drastically. His recreation quirk could recreate a target's quirk or even recreate a body part. Because it operated without his conscious activation, it made him extraordinarily resilient. He was decisive but reckless, valued camaraderie despite his attitude, and was affectionate toward Shoto and Izuku. He was ranked SS+. Midoriya Izuku was described as dense, rebellious, cold in some moments, intelligent, and kind. His inborn quirk, fire breath, allowed him to produce and shape fire from his mouth. Later, Izuku, Katsuki, and Shoto arrived at the airport. As they prepared to board, Kigo called to them and addressed them as his little brothers. Izuku responded by calling him Brother Kigo. Katsuki asked angrily what they were expected to do there. Kigo told them to be quiet and explained that their purpose was proper training under him. The commission's equipment and tools were limited, so the training would take place where Kigo was based. He had already arranged a driver to meet them. Shoto wondered about the possibility of living a normal life, questioning the restrictions they faced. Izuku also found the arrangement confusing. Kigo said they would understand more once they returned to Japan when they turned 15. The boys reacted with shock at the thought of living away for 7 years. Kigo clarified that they would live with him, attend a prestigious school there, and have a comfortable house, daily necessities provided, clothing available, a choice of weapons, and many other supports in place. Hawks assured them they did not have to worry and told them their finances were taken care of, with 10 million on their card every year. Izuku called out that they were about to board the plane and said goodbye to Brother Kigo. Hawks returned the farewell, and then Izuku ended the call. All 3 boys boarded the plane with heavy sighs. None of them had expected to leave for America for 7 years, and they suspected their master, Lady Nagant, probably wouldn't come to see them. A flight attendant bowed politely and smiled as he greeted them. Izuku wondered inwardly why they were receiving such special treatment, but he settled into the farthest room and leaned back on the bed. Todoroki suggested they rest, noting there were 9 hours until arrival. Katsuki, tired from training, scooped Izuku and Shoto up as if they were stuffed toys, and the 3 of them quickly fell asleep. When they arrived in Washington, D.C., Izuku yawned and looked for the sign. Shoto pointed out a man in white holding a poster that read Izuku, Shoto, Katsuki. Katsuki, surprisingly unconcerned, remarked that they would be living with Hawks, whom they jokingly called chicken nuggets. Izuku nodded in agreement as they walked toward the man in white. The man asked if they were Hawks' companions. The 3 boys nodded and followed him to a waiting luxury car. Izuku thought about his family's wealth but admitted he had never received treatment like this before. The attention at the airport felt unfamiliar. The driver asked whether they wanted to go straight to the house or look around the city. Katsuki chose to go to the house first, joking about chicken nuggets, which made the driver chuckle. The driver explained he was Oxley Carroll's, the butler of the Takami family, and drove them off. At the Takami residence, Kigo greeted them enthusiastically. The boys stepped out of the car and took in a sprawling mansion with a large pool, backyard, and grounds. Shoto asked Kigo to confirm that this was their home. Kigo, smiling, said it was. Izuku blurted that the place was enormous. Kigo teased him about his language and reminded him that Izuku had barely left the commission for 4 years, then added that this would be where they lived and offered to give them a tour. Shoto, still astonished, noted that he had never seen anything like this even though his family was wealthy. He patted Izuku's head in a quiet gesture of shared amazement. Katsuki mentioned that he had visited the Yaoyorozu residence for business and it had also been grand. He gave both boys quick, affectionate pecks on their cheeks and then led them toward the house. Shoto sighed about the oddity of having such a car when they could fly, and Izuku suggested the vehicle was likely for fetching guests. Katsuki teased both of them for getting overwhelmed by the luxury. They reached 2 large doors with a medieval design and stepped inside. Kigo opened the doors to reveal a grand corridor with stairs leading to the 2nd floor and a vast space extending toward the back. Kigo explained that the 1st floor contained the kitchen, wine room, storage, guest room, living room, and several bathrooms. The 2nd floor housed additional guest rooms, a 2nd living area, and the dining room. He also mentioned that this was only the main building and that 2 doors on the 2nd floor led to left and right wings of the residence. The left building held their rooms and everything they needed, The right building was for visitors who stayed a week or a month. Kigo explained that he also slept in the left building and that the maids and butlers had their own rooms there, so if they could not find someone they could check the servants' quarters. Kigo laughed and reminded them that the most important thing was to have fun. Izuku reflected that everyone seemed to have freedom here, which felt different from life in the commission. Under the commission's rules, they had daily schedules they could not disobey without punishment, and missions came every couple of days. Failing them also led to penalties. Fortunately, those missions had stopped several months before their departure to America. Despite the commission's restrictions, Izuku, Shoto, and Katsuki had enjoyed training with Lady Nagant and Kigo and had made friends during their missions. Izuku wondered, with growing excitement, what it would be like to have true freedom now. Kigo laughed and said he would show them to their rooms, then used his wings to fly up to the second floor. The trio followed, ignoring the stairs. Izuku privately wondered what purpose the stairs served for them. Later, Izuku sat on the couch in the living room and wondered how Kigo had known to give him a room with a music studio and a gaming room, decorated entirely around music. He thought about whether Kigo had known how much he liked music. Shoto sat quietly and noted that Kigo had made his room feel like a traditional Japanese house, with a gaming room and a dance practice space. He mentioned that he had learned to dance from his brother Tuya and asked whether the others could sing or play instruments. Izuku leaned back and remembered that he could sing and play guitar, piano, and kalimba. Katsuki added that he could sing and had learned many instruments when Deku began piano lessons, because their parents had wanted him to learn. Shoto observed that the four of them had hobbies, and Izuku thought about how quickly they had all learned when they were young. Kigo entered the living room carrying a tray of fruit. Anne grinned, admitting he had been keeping tabs on their preferences for a while. Katsuki protested playfully at Kigo's eavesdropping. Kigo then handed them personal credit cards and suggested they go to the mall to buy clothes or anything else they wanted, even a car if they chose. He explained that America's State Security Commission was providing the money and left the room after placing 3 differently colored credit cards, blue, white, and yellow, on the table. The trio stared in disbelief. Shoto asked what they should do next. Izuku answered that they should use the cards. He explained that the commission was extremely wealthy and the amounts they had been given were small compared to its assets. Katsuki immediately wanted to go to the mall to buy a skateboard and school supplies. Izuku agreed, and the 3 rushed out, Shoto following more slowly. At the mall they debated what to buy first. Shoto suggested purchasing necessities like school supplies, and Katsuki agreed while eyeing nearby restaurants. They bought school supplies, quirk-canceling bracelets, quirk suppressors, and other items for training, then went to a store that sold skateboards. At the skateboard shop, Izuku asked about a particular model in English. They spoke fluently after learning the language at the commission. The seller, noting their brand name clothing, mentioned that the displayed skateboards were the most expensive and priced at $35,000. Katsuki asked about color options and, finding a suitable color, paid with his card while the 3 of them agreed to share the expense. Suddenly, an 8-year-old boy with pink hair shouted for help and used his quirk to immobilize a villain in a dramatic anime-style move. Izuku and the others rushed out to see what was happening. 3 more young boys were engaged with the villain in a fast-paced, stylized confrontation. Izuku wondered whether they carried commission identification or training exemption cards. Those documents allowed children between 5 and 15 to assist with low-risk villain incidents as part of their training. As of now, they carried the Commissioner card from the Hero Public Security Commission and the ASSC card given to them by Kigo before they left their residence. Beside the pink-haired boy earlier, there had been a white-haired boy who manipulated ice, a black-haired boy who could control shadows, and a blonde boy who was staring warily at the villain. Izuku continued observing, noting that the white-haired boy and the black-haired boy's quirks were obvious while the other 2 remained uncertain. The white-haired boy produced ice and instantly froze the villain's legs, while the black-haired boy shaped shadows into a spike to restrain him. When they thought they had him, they lowered their guard by accident. The villain seized the chance and broke free of the ice. The pink-haired boy, distracted, accidentally deactivated his controlling quirk. The villain's eyes turned red and his body swelled as if his quirk pushed him into a berserk state. Izuku suspected it was either an animal-related quirk or a berserk-type quirk, and the three of them exchanged knowing looks. The villain swung a fist toward the blonde boy, who did not flinch. At the last moment, black, blue, and white feathers fluttered from above as if angels had descended. Someone intercepted the blow. Izuku had extended his dragon-like wings and placed a red protective barrier against the villain's strike, blocking it. The blonde boy stared in marvel as Izuku opened his wings and used his feathers to press the villain back a few meters. Bright light then flashed and blinded the villain. Shoto had bent light toward the villain's eyes to disorient him. As the light dimmed and shadows grew, Katsuki emerged from the dark and used his shadow manipulation to bind the villain. Finally, Izuku raised his dominant hand and froze part of the villain's body, stopping his movement. The late heroes and the civilians watching stared at the trio in bewilderment. Izuku then asked the boy about his quirk. The boy explained shyly that his quirk was interval. He could stop a target's quirk by staring at them, and he could even use an emitter-type quirk against its own user while maintaining eye contact. Izuku understood that the boy had to keep looking for it to work, and he inquired whether they had identification. The boy replied that they carried exception identification cards because they were from the Harvey Hero Training School. When Izuku asked if the boy could move while using his quirk, the pink-haired boy clarified that he could move, but he and his classmates had not yet been taught hand-to-hand combat at their school. The three of them looked to the pink-haired boy for more detail, and Izuku asked what the pink-haired boy had been doing earlier. He had seemed to be suppressing the villain. The pink-haired boy explained that his quirk was force manipulation. He absorbed force into his body and released it at a chosen point, able to reinforce his strikes by channeling more force into his fists. Izuku then compared the black-haired boy's quirk to Katsuki's, and Katsuki confirmed that the black-haired boy manipulated shadows while Katsuki himself leaned more toward dark manipulation. Izuku noted that the white-haired boy's control resembled Shoto's, and Shoto agreed that his control was impressive. The pink-haired boy asked who the three of them were. Izuku introduced himself as Aoi Izuku and introduced Akashi Shoto and Takemi Katsuki. Shoto asked for the names of the four newcomers, and they replied that they were Jamie Miles, Jack Foster, Salvio Prince, and Vincent Grid. After the battle, the heroes asked for the villain's identities and secured him, leaving him with minor burns and scratches. They took Katsuki's card from the cellar and retrieved the skateboards they had bought. Jamie, Vincent, Salvio, and Jack walked with them while they chatted about many things. Jamie expressed disbelief that the famous American hero student Takami Kigo, also known as Hawks, was a family friend and asked whether Katsuki was Hawks' brother in a teasing tone. Salvio remarked that Takami Kigo and Katsuki appeared to be from the same family. Katsuki, irritated, insisted that he was not Hawks' brother. Jack asked where Katsuki was attending school now that he was living in America. Shoto said they still did not know, and at that moment Izuku's phone began to ring. Izuku answered and heard Hawks ask what time it was. Glancing at his phone, Izuku realized it was already 5 in the afternoon. He apologized and told Hawks they had forgotten and would come at once. Hawks warned that school registration closed at 6, and Izuku asked Hawks to call Oxley and return home alone so they would not be kept waiting. Hawks agreed and hung up. Izuku told Shoto and Katsuki that they had to leave immediately because they needed to get to the school registrar. Shoto and Katsuki checked their watches and saw the time. Katsuki cursed under his breath at the rush, and Shoto hurried them along. Izuku apologized to the others and promised to find them when they had time, then activated his wings and, with Shoto and Katsuki, flew away from the mall. The next day, after registering, they became official students of Harvard Hero Training School, the top-ranked young hero training school in America. The three woke in their room and went through their daily routine as if continuing the training they had followed in Japan. They dressed in their uniforms with their wings activated and gathered outside the house. Kigo observed their uniforms and complimented how well they looked, noting the attractive appearance and majestic wings set off by the black and neon uniforms with white polos and red ties. He teased them to be careful not to capture every girl's heart at school. The three responded with quick affirmations, and Kigo smiled as they set off. Izuku replied playfully that they did not plan to. Shoto asked whether they should really use their wings all the time. Kigo laughed and explained that if they did not, activating their quirks would destroy their uniforms. Izuku asked whether the uniforms were weak, and Kigo confirmed that the uniforms would only break if someone used a quirk or was hit by one. He added that they would change into training clothes when preparing to train. Kigo snickered and urged them to leave before they were late. Katsuki agreed and headed for the car, saying that they would split things evenly. Shoto followed Katsuki and said goodbye, and Izuku climbed into the car. Kigo waved and offered a gentle farewell. At Harvard Hero Training School, Class 3-1 buzzed with conversation about 3 new students who were arriving. The class, training to become heroes and connected to professional heroes, speculated about the newcomers. Jamie, a boy with pink hair, asked his classmates what the newcomers looked like. One student said that the 3 had wings, one blue, one reddish-black, and one white, but their faces had been unseen. Jamie turned to his friends Vincent, Salvio, and Jack and suggested that the description matched the trio they had seen. The teacher reminded everyone to show respect to the new students. A few minutes later, the teacher called the 3 newcomers into the classroom with a smile. The 3 boys entered and revealed majestic, noble wings as they stood before the class. The teacher asked them to introduce themselves and describe their quirks. The boy with blue hair, Aoi Izuku, introduced himself and said that his quirk, Dragon Wings, allowed him to manipulate elements with the help of his wings in addition to flying. Shoto explained in a calm tone that his quirk, Angel Wings, let him heal and manipulate light. Katsuki stated with a hint of annoyance that his quirk, Devil Wings, allowed him to manipulate darkness and become a shadow. The class reacted with a mix of gasps and excitement at their appearance and names. The trio were connected to famous heroes. The students except for Jamie and his 3 friends displayed lively curiosity. The teacher pointed out vacant seats at the back and said class would begin soon, then left the room. The trio sat at the back as arranged. Jamie smirked and told Izuku that he had not expected them to attend the same school. Izuku smiled and said it was good to see the 4 of them. The class registered surprise when Jamie asked whether they knew one another. Shoto explained calmly that they were acquainted by coincidence, having met at the mall while buying school supplies and skateboarding. Jack invited them to skateboard together. Katsuki asked if they knew a place to skate, and Salvio said there was a park nearby. Katsuki said his skateboard was in the car and suggested they go later, showing a growing liking for the group. A short time later, the class gathered for quirk training. The male teacher, a professional hero, instructed Izuku, Shoto, and Katsuki to demonstrate their best moves. All 3 already had special moves linked to their inborn quirks: Howitzer Impact for Katsuki, Heavenly Piercing Ice for Shoto, and Flame Annihilation for Izuku, but they did not yet have special moves tailored to using their wings. Katsuki volunteered to go first. He closed his eyes and opened his wings. In an instant he vanished, silhouettes flashing across the training area as if struck by lightning. He reappeared behind the training dummies and disabled them with a single, powerful strike that moved faster than the eye could follow. Katsuki named the move Demon Dance. Izuku and Shoto exchanged impressed looks, recognizing that Katsuki had adapted his Howitzer Impact to gain lethal speed and pinpoint precision. Izuku stepped forward next and opened his wings. He scattered feathers into the air and controlled them into a ring of spinning blades. The controlled movement and speed of the feathers let the ring slice cleanly through the dummy's supports and mechanisms, disabling them with remarkable precision. Izuku called the technique Draconic Rings. Katsuki returned the smirk and silently acknowledged the skill in front of him. Shoto approached last. He focused his white feathers, which attacked with swift, SRNG strikes. Each feather struck in rapid succession, erupting in arcs of light that disabled the dummies with elegant, radiating force. Shoto named the attack Inescapable Grasp. The 3 of them bumped fists, sharing a moment of mutual respect. The observing hero smiled with a nervous relief, thinking that these students were strong and would go on to become top heroes in the future. Katsuki focused on speed, Izuku focused on control, and Shoto focused on strength. These kids were not just strong, they were also talented and intelligent. The school was not boring. There were heroes to train with, and the trio enjoyed sparring with them. Their control, speed, and strength were already impressive. They only needed experience and refinement to become even stronger. At the end of the day, The quirk ranking, where each quirk was registered, would reflect overall performance, and the trio held the top spot. Jamie, Vincent, Salvio, and Jack were all ranked second. They were powerful as well, but they lacked the trio's blend of speed and raw strength. Shoto stood with his black skateboard, Izuku with his blue one, and Katsuki with a red board. Shoto asked where they were going next. Jamie replied that they were headed to Hone Park, a Japanese-style park where skateboards could be used freely. Jamie was the loudest and friendliest of his group. Vincent was quiet and spoke only when necessary, Salvio was serious, and Jack enjoyed teasing others but was friendly as well. Izuku, who loved reading, admitted he had not heard of the park before. Salvio explained that the park had been created in September 1135, at the start of the Hone era. Jack hoped the troublesome kids they had been warned about would not be there. When Katsuki asked who those kids were, Jamie said they were peers from another hero training school and that they were annoying. Izuku tried to lighten the mood, encouraging everyone to enjoy the day and not be provoked. The group nodded and let the matter drop. Jamie put on a broad smile and urged them to have fun. The park was vast and almost forest-like, comforting and expansive. 1/3 of it was the Hone skate park, and that was where they began to play. The fun continued until a sharp voice called out, asking if they were the children of heroes from 4 years prior. When Izuku, Katsuki, and Shoto heard the voice, they recognized it as coming from one of the people Jamie's group disliked, and their curiosity was piqued. Brian, the speaker, continued, taunting Jamie's group about their parents' reputations. Vincent, unusually angry, told Brian to stop invoking their families' names. Shoto silently considered the implication that some of the students had ties to heroes who were no longer alive. Brian had black hair and red eyes and stood with 3 smug friends, radiating arrogance. He claimed Jamie's parents had been incompetent and had died at the hands of Glacius. Jamie's group trembled with anger but held themselves back from immediately retaliating. Katsuki muttered to Jamie that he should punch Brian, but Jamie explained in a whisper that they were already under scrutiny for fighting those kids and could risk expulsion if they picked a public fight. Izuku and Shoto, with senses sharpened by their quirks and training, could hear the quiet exchange. Brian continued to taunt them by calling them chickens. Katsuki, Izuku, and Shoto fixed him with hard stares that made Brian flinch. He suddenly felt intimidated, as if he were facing experienced fighters rather than ordinary students. Feeling threatened, Brian backed away a few steps. Shoto replied in a cold tone that the word had been repeated, and Izuku told Brian to back off. When Brian realized he had misjudged the newcomers as part of Jamie's group and had underestimated them, fear showed across his face. In an instant, Izuku's wings unfolded, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared, and he moved to stand directly in front of Brian, projecting a calm but unyielding presence. Katsuki used his wings to showcase a visible threat, while Shoto deployed his feathers to immobilize the others in Brian's group, all done in a precise, controlled manner that felt like an intense moment from an action scene. Izuku warned that only certain figures' hawks and their master could speak to them that way, and then suggested consequences for anyone who persisted. Brian shook his head, visibly shaken. Izuku added that the commission would back serious measures against those who crossed certain lines, an exaggerated claim meant to intimidate. In truth, their group had a history of taking down dangerous criminals and had been granted significant authority by the relevant agencies, so the threat carried weight even if its phrasing had been bluster. Hearing the word commission made Brian visibly tremble, and the reaction from his group confirmed to Shoto and the others that the commission in this country held more overt power over heroes than in Japan. In Japan, many heroes were independent of the commission. Here, they were more directly governed. Shoto then told Brian to leave if he wanted to avoid trouble, making it clear that they did not want to be bothered. Katsuki added that if Brian did not back off, they would respond forcefully. The tension remained high until Brian and his friends retreated, and the group breathed a collective sigh of relief before returning to their skateboarding and training. Brian nodded in a shaky, instinctive way and stared at the group in fear. He could not meet Izuku's eyes. They were so cold they felt dangerous. The trio drew their wings and feathers in and allowed Brian and his companions to leave. Brian's group hurried away as if their lives depended on it. Katsuki laughed, remarking that it had been a while since they had intimidated someone. Izuku told Jamie, Vincent, Jack, and Salvio that if the others returned they should stand and fight, and that the Commission and their brother would support them. Jamie thanked him, though his expression betrayed mixed emotions. Shoto asked to hear what had happened, especially after they had heard of the notorious villain in America called Glacius. After a moment of thought, Jamie and the others agreed to tell their story. Jamie began 4 years earlier, when Glacius was still active. Glacius committed murder, theft, and many other crimes using a quirk called ice particles, which let him form ice from the air. It was deceptively simple and devastatingly powerful. He could freeze entire districts. Jamie explained that his parents, Vincent's parents, and Salvio's parents had taken part in a large operation to capture Glacius, alongside 200 other heroes. Jack had been held captive and tortured by Glacius because of their blood relation. Glacius was Jack's father. The top 3 heroes had been absent that day, away on missions. The heroes succeeded in capturing Glacius and rescuing Jack, but the operation had been costly. 122 heroes died and dozens more were injured. Jamie, Vincent, and Salvio had lost their parents in that assault. Feeling responsible for the losses, the top 3 heroes afterward took it upon themselves to care for the families and relatives of the fallen, helping them to rebuild their lives. The fact that Jack was Glacius's son was kept secret from the public. The 4 boys met by chance and, despite the pain and the complicated history between them, formed bonds that grew into a family. Izuku felt sympathy for their plight and smiled as he stroked Katsuki's dark, plush feathers. Vincent asked about Izuku's group next. Shoto asked if they wanted to hear their side of the story. Salvio laughed awkwardly and tried to brush it off, but the trio insisted they would tell their story too. They simply wanted someone to listen. The 3 of them had endured experimental training from the Commission and rigorous conditioning, but they harbored no hate toward their handlers. Even if their lives sometimes felt like a bird in a cage, they accepted it as long as they had each other. 7 years later, the 7 of them were closer than ever and knew each other's secrets, including their quirks and pasts. They had earned a reputation and were known by a collective title, the 7 Deadly Sins. Katsuki embodied wrath. Izuku embodied pride. Shoto embodied envy. Jamie embodied gluttony. Vincent embodied sloth. Salvio embodied greed. Jack embodied desire in a more playful, charismatic way. Those titles reflected their personalities: Katsuki's permanent scowl, Izuku's prideful, sometimes bitter air, Shoto's quiet yearning for the things his friends had, Jamie's appetite, Vincent's reserved, languid nature, Salvio's opportunistic drive to win, and Jack's outgoing charm. They became well known to heroes across the eastern part of America, even though their true identities were tightly guarded. Over those years they trained without cease. Their determination drew Hawks's interest. Hawks and the top trio helped train them and later invited them to become part of the Takami household, allowing them to remain together. The harsh training paid off. By middle school they had become exceptionally strong. Jack's quirk, force manipulation, let him control forces such as acceleration, mass, momentum, and other related effects. It was extraordinarily powerful even if he had not yet learned its full range, and he could not fully manipulate gravity. He continued training to expand his control. Vincent's quirk interval, allowed him to slow or stop the time interval of a target as long as he maintained visual contact. To make this more reliable, he trained to keep his eyes open for extended PRDs, even at the cost of discomfort, so he could use his ability instantly if needed. He also learned to interfere with the emitter-type quirks and to turn that interference to his advantage. Salvio's quirk, Shadow, let him manipulate darkness. He worked constantly to stretch and shape shadows, practicing during the day by bringing light into the training room to study how shadows behaved and during the night to push their limits. Among them, others trained complementary skills. One developed precise nullification that required touch to work. Another honed a foresight-like perception that let them predict movements at frightening accuracy at the cost of severe headaches. And Izuku trained an absorption ability that could take in emitter-type quirks and store them for later use. Izuku could store multiple quirks and release them with amplified power, and he continually pushed himself to expand that capacity. Together they forged a tight unit, each member growing stronger in ways that complemented the others, bound by shared loss and the resolve to protect one another. For now, he could only store 6 quirks. Kigo called that quirk Absorb and Release. Kigo knew that all quirks had drawbacks, but looking at 7 of them it seemed like the drawbacks did not affect them much. He was a proud brother of his younger siblings, who were talented enough to become world-class heroes. During their free time they practiced their hobby of singing, dancing, and playing instruments, which led them to form a band 3 years ago named Reverse. When asked about the name, they simply said it sounded cool. There was no deeper reason. Their popularity spread among heroes, vigilantes, and even villains, but their identities remained secret except to themselves, their households' maids and butlers, and Kigo. The Commission and Lady Nagant did not know. Kigo announced that they were going back to Japan. The 7 of them grew visibly excited. Izuku, Shoto, and Katsuki wanted to return to their homeland, while Jamie, Vincent, Salvio, and Jack had long dreamed of seeing and living in Japan. Kigo then adopted a dead serious expression and told them he had both good and bad news. Katsuki challenged him to give the good news first. Kigo revealed that they were all free from the Commission and were no longer confined. They were wild birds again. The trio brightened and the other 4 congratulated them on their newfound freedom. Shoto asked what the bad news was, bracing himself. Kigo explained that 5 years earlier he had lost contact with their master and, worried about her, he had called the new chairman, the former vice-chairman. Kigo had learned that their master had been imprisoned after being framed by the Liberation Front and accused of treason. The 3 fell silent. Katsuki erupted in anger and demanded to know who had framed her. Izuku noticed Katsuki's outburst and hugged him from behind while Shoto held Katsuki's hand. Kigo said that the chairman of the Liberation Front had accused their master of stealing important files and murdering the previous chairman, forcing the former vice-chairman to side with the Liberation Front because of their greater strength. Kigo closed his eyes in solemnity, sharing the anger they all felt toward the Liberation Front. Shoto, with tears forming in his eyes, insisted that she would not do such a thing. Kigo and the others agreed that their master would never betray the Commission and that she must have been framed. Kigo added that the new chairman of the Commission believed the same and that the Commission had begun improving their systems and security to prevent similar incidents. Jamie, Vincent, Salvio, and Jack also knew their master as a second mother and were equally shocked by the news. At that moment, Hawks's phone rang. He answered. It was the chairman of the Commission calling. Hawks greeted the chairman, and the chairman acknowledged how hard the situation had been for Hawks and his brothers. The chairman apologized and asked a favor. He requested that the boys enroll in UA. Hawks put the call on speaker and presented it to his brothers, who responded together in greeting. The chairman expressed regret for siding with the Liberation Front and asked them to attend UA. He promised to help find evidence proving that Tsutsumi was innocent and asked them to wait for news. Katsuki told the chairman that enrolling at UA was already their plan and reassured him that they still owed him for treating them like nephews. The chairman felt touched by Katsuki's stubborn but sincere words and thanked them, expressing hope that they would grow into full-fledged heroes. They did not want to admit it, but they liked the new chairman and the former vice-chairman. He had always taken care of them and treated them kindly. 3 days later, Izuku, Shoto, and Katsuki were sleeping in the same room. When Izuku woke to the alarm, he roused Shoto and Katsuki. The others were just waking as well, and they all had breakfast together. They had mostly moved on from the matter of their master but still burned with anger toward the Liberation Front and swore they would one day seek justice. After breakfast they changed and went to the airport, each of the trio inwardly smiling at the thought of returning to Japan. A man in a suit who resembled a butler introduced himself to them at the airport as Hataki Dai and explained that the Commission had recruited him. He informed them that the Commission had prepared everything for the 8 of them: a house, daily necessities, and paperwork for Jamie, Vincent, Jack, and Salvio. He led them to an expensive car and opened the door for them. Kigo asked where they would be staying. Dai replied that their house was in Mizudafu, near UA. They rode to the house, and once inside they sat in the living room. Kigo worried aloud about what information they should use when entering UA, fearing that if their parents appeared they might try to take Izuku, Shoto, and Katsuki away from the Takami household. Shoto suggested they use their real identities and their inborn quirks. Kigo voiced the concern that their parents might demand to take them away, and for a moment they all fell silent, considering the possibility and what it might mean for their future. Izuku snickered as he set the coffee he had prepared on the table and noted that they did not even remember their parents' faces. Even if they met them, they would either remain where they were or bargain with stubborn parents. Kigo asked if Izuku would stay with him, and Izuku hugged Kigo in reassurance. Katsuki laughed and teased that Kigo was their chicken nugget. Shoto agreed with the others. Jamie, Vincent, Salvio, and Jack smiled gently, touched by the warmth of the bond. To outsiders it appeared as a close, platonic brotherhood. Izuku then asked when the UA test would occur. The living room door opened and revealed Principal Nizu, Aizawa Shota, All Might, and Present Mike. The 7 in the room stared at the visitors, assuming they were pro-heroes. Izuku was puzzled by the sight of a small, bear-like creature in a suit standing like a human. Kigo sighed, stood, stretched his wings, and identified the visitors as Principal Nizu, Aizawa, All Might, and Present Mike. Principal Nizu apologized for not announcing the visit earlier in a calm voice. Aizawa made a neutral remark. Shoto wondered whether Nizu might be a subject of an experiment, since quirks did not normally appear on animals. All Might smiled and asked if the young men were Kigo's adopted brothers. Aizawa commented on how many brothers Kigo had. Kigo explained in a playful tone that he had adopted Jamie, Vincent, Jack, and Salvio many years ago and that the other children were kids of a friend, adding that they were very talented. Present Mike thought Kigo sounded more like a proud parent than a brother. All Might, staring at Izuku, Shoto, and Katsuki, said that their names felt familiar. Principal Nizu replied that the commission had mentioned the children, so they had come to verify the report, noting that they could not afford to trust anyone blindly. Present Mike asked about the children's quirks. Kigo listed them. Izuku's quirk was Dragon Breath, Shoto's was Cold Fire, Hot Ice, Katsuki's was Dark Explosion, Jamie's was Force Manipulation, Vincent's was Quirk Interval, Salvio's was Shadow, and Jack's was Ice. Kigo spoke enthusiastically about how impressive their quirks were. Present Mike again thought Kigo sounded more like a proud parent. Principal Nizu asked whether the children would be recommended to UA or take the entrance exam. Kigo deferred the decision to the kids. The 7 exchanged looks and, after a moment, agreed that they would take the test. Principal Nizu expressed concern that Quirk Interval did not seem like a combat-oriented quirk. Jack giggled and explained that Quirk Interval allowed him to use or control other people's quirks and that he could even handle quirkless opponents. Principal Nizu laughed and agreed to proceed with the plan. Kigo asked the 4 adopted sons to sit, but Principal Nizu waved them off, saying they were only there to check on the children the commission had high hopes for and that they would be leaving. Kigo watched them leave with a playful farewell but felt a cold suspicion that they likely had another reason for the visit that he did not yet know. Outside, Principal Nizu asked All Might whether one of the children might become his successor. All Might acknowledged that their quirks were fitting for hero work but said he would not decide until he understood their true nature and life goals. Principal Nizu turned to Aizawa and remarked that, based on the quirks, the kids could fill 7 of the 25 slots Aizawa would soon be handling. Aizawa commented that they would probably be problem children. Principal Nizu laughed that he wanted to see how they performed in the exam. Present Mike and the others exchanged thoughts about the names Izuku and Shoto. Principal Nizu reminded them that the names came from 11 years earlier, which meant the children would have been 4 to 5 years old at that time. Aizawa and All Might realized the names matched those of Enji and Hisashi's child and the son of a famous fashion company. Principal Nizu stated that Midoriya Izuku, Bakugo Katsuki, and Todoroki Shoto had been recorded as deceased in the commission's files. Present Mike asked in shock why they were with Hawks. Principal Nizu answered that Hawks had likely helped those 3 when the commission announced their deaths and that the real purpose of their visit had been to make sure the children were all right. Present Mike showed slight annoyance at Principal Nizu's fondness for secrecy. Principal Nizu admitted he did not know the backgrounds of the other 4 children but that the 7 were close to Hawks, so there was no immediate cause for concern. All Might asked about the children's families. Principal Nizu said they would keep the information secret for now and that their identities would likely be revealed in time. President Mike began driving as they agreed to wait for the children to introduce themselves to their families or the public. Back at the residence, Kigo announced that for the next 2 days they would train non-stop. Jack asked if they did not already train constantly. Kigo explained that this time it would be a free battle and that he would join in, making everyone a target. Kigo smirked at the group. Katsuki laughed and warned Kigo to be prepared. Katsuki announced that they would beat him, smirking with excitement. Kigo teased that he was being challenged and called Katsuki a Pomeranian bird. Katsuki demanded to know what a Pomeranian bird was, veins bulging with irritation. Kigo laughed, saying Katsuki looked like a Pomeranian with wings, which only annoyed Katsuki, who dashed toward him. Kigo evaded him while laughing loudly. Izuku and the others laughed as well, continuing the teasing. Katsuki shouted in frustration. 2 days later, they trained non-stop. They had improved considerably in those 2 days, largely because Kigo had been a great help. Kigo, also known as Hawks, was fast and agile and had been considered one of the fastest pro heroes in America, so training with him boosted their battle capabilities. Their speed, sixth sense, and dexterity all sharpened. Their overall combat ability rose by roughly 5%, placing them around the level of a third-year hero course student. Izuku muttered that they had finally arrived at UA. Jack sighed heavily and hoped the written exam would be easy. Academics had never been his strong suit. Izuku scoffed and reassured them that the lessons from America were more than enough. He explained that the Middle Hero Training School covered everything taught in the first year of the hero course, so they were likely more advanced than many of the other students. Salvio suggested they go and find seats. Pro Hero Vlad observed that those were the 7 kids recommended by the commission. Principal Nizu explained that the students did not know they had been recommended because he had asked if they wanted a recommendation or to take the test, and they had chosen to take the exam. He said this while watching the camera view of the school's entrance. Aizawa commented that they appeared to be energetic youths. Midnight agreed and said she was curious about their potential, noting that the commission had particularly praised the ash-colored-haired student, the dual-colored-haired student, and the blue-haired student. Nizu added that Kigo might have told them their quirks, but they had yet to see how those quirks were used. Aizawa then told President Mike to head to the orientation, which would start in 10 minutes. President Mike dashed out of the faculty toward the orientation. The 7 Izuku, Katsuki, Shoto, Salvio, Vincent, Jamie, and Jack arrived at the orientation and waited for the host. They sat for more than 20 minutes before the familiar loud host appeared. Jamie frowned at the man, thinking that he was the same loud personality from before. President Mike energetically welcomed the examinees with his loud stage persona, but his opening was met with silence. He waited, then tried again, still met by quiet. He sighed and proceeded with the announcement. President Mike explained that the practice exam would consist of a written exam followed by a 10-minute mock battle in the city. A large screen behind him displayed a diagram of 7 practice areas labeled A through G. He said that after the written exam they would change into comfortable combat clothes and head to their assigned practice centers. The students looked down at the papers distributed earlier. The sheets showed their numbers and their practice centers. Katsuki noticed that friends had not been placed together and pointed this out as he examined Izuku's paper, which showed his number as 2234 in ground beta while Izuku's paper showed 2233 in ground alpha. Izuku quietly listed the sequence of numbers and realized that all 7 of them had been assigned to different grounds. President Mike explained that each practice center would feature 3 types of virtual villains and that students would earn points depending on the villains' levels. He advised everyone to use their quirks to defeat or immobilize the robots and earn points, and warned not to harm others or act unheroically. A young blue-haired man with glasses raised a hand and questioned a printout that listed 4 villain types, suggesting it might be a misprint and criticizing murmuring in the crowd as distracting. He turned and glared at Izuku's group. Izuku replied that they had been whispering about how the school distributed the practice grounds and pointed out that the blue-haired man had interrupted before President Mike had finished. Shoto added that the man's uniform marked him as a student from the elite Somei Junior High. Katsuki scoffed and told the man to judge before speaking. Present Mike acknowledged their deductive abilities and moved to calm the tension. Present Mike clarified that the fourth villain type on the printout was worth 0 points and functioned as an outcast gimmick in each center. Destroying it yielded no points and it should be avoided. He then bestowed the school motto, quoting Napoleon Bonaparte's idea that true heroism consists in rising above life's difficulties, and ended with the school's catchphrase, shouting over and beyond, plus ultra. He began announcing the details for the written examination and the students filed into their rooms to take the test. The written exam proved to be surprisingly straightforward, covering branches of science, mathematics, English, literature, and even physical health. The last part of the written examination slowed them down. It required intense comprehension of every situation. The final page was devoted to hero study and ethics, a subject they had not covered in middle school, so the questions were mostly hypothetical scenarios. There were also some traditional questions, like what to do if one's mother and lover were in danger. Izuku answered that, as long as it was within his capability, he would prefer to save them both, not only for their sake but also for others in the same situation. Katsuki replied bluntly that he would save them both without further explanation. All 7 finished and handed their papers to present Mike, who looked surprised at how fast they had completed the exam. Present Mike then instructed the students to change and wait half an hour for the practical exam. Shoto responded in a monotone, and the group immediately changed into combat clothes or something similar. They all carried katanas to avoid relying on their quirks too much. Jamie's katana sat at Izuku's waist because Jamie had been too lazy to wear his belt. The blades came in a variety of colors. Izuku's was dark blue, Katsuki's orange, Shoto's bluish-white, Jamie's pink, Vincent's yellow, Salvio's blue, and Jack's pure white. The commission had issued the katanas and Kigo had handed them over. They were relieved to finally have their own swords after years of training, and they had even developed unique sword techniques to use with them. Izuku asked the others what they had answered to the final question. Jack explained that the question had asked what they would do if they were the source of chaos in the world. Shoto said he had answered that he would atone for his sins and stop the chaos he had caused. Izuku added that his answer was to end whatever he had begun. Jamie accepted a bottle of Izuku's green tea and thought that if he were the cause of a mess he would likely be treated as an outcast, but if he stopped what he had started there might be a chance for forgiveness. Katsuki pointed out that none of them had done anything wrong for years and did not plan to. Izuku shrugged and laughed that they had been reckless, which explained why they had been nicknamed the 7 deadly sins in America. Salvio smirked that they could no longer be compared to their past selves now that they were real hero trainees. Vincent frowned and touched his forehead, recalling how Izuku tended to destroy everything in fights. Katsuki used explosive force, and Shoto relied on blinding cold. Izuku hummed that they would not hold back. Katsuki dismissed the defeated villains as mere extras. They had drunk half the bottle by the time Izuku checked his watch. He told the group to split up since the practical exam would begin in 5 minutes. In the rush, Jamie forgot his katana at Izuku's waist. They separated and took their assigned grounds. Katsuki to ground Alpha, Izuku to ground Beta, Shoto to ground Charlie, Salvio to ground Delta, Vincent to ground Echo, Jamie to ground Foxtrot, and Jack to ground Gamma. Izuku lingered with Jamie's katana, considering trying a dual sword style. All 7 scanned the other examinees for decent opponents and found themselves disappointed. Most of the other students seemed far below a quarter of the group's physical prowess and quirk control. Having trained at the commission for 4 years and another 7 years in America, they had expected higher standards. Izuku recognized the boy who had asked a question earlier and felt a flash of irritation. He tended to hold grudges. After stretching and observing, a voice from the speaker announced the start. Present Mike urged the remaining students to move and encouraged them to follow the blue-haired boy and run. Izuku dashed into the artificially ruined town filled with test robots. He disabled the machines in an efficient, fluid style, slicing through their core movement nodes so they powered down like wind-up toys stopping mid-step. He used a fallen robot as a platform to launch himself from, counting points as he worked. He noted mentally that he had earned the 77th point. According to Kigo, the highest recorded score from UA had been 154, and accumulating over 100 points would be more than enough to secure a place in the 1A hero course. Izuku decided that 101 points would be his goal. In the darkroom, where the staff and All Might watched, everyone observed each student's movements and monitored their points. Principal Nizu explained that in this practice exam the number and locations of the villains were undisclosed. He noted that the short time limit and large field were designed to draw out the ability to quickly gather information, the mobility to respond to different situations, the discernment to stay calm under pressure, and raw combat ability. These basic qualities necessary for the city's peace were being measured by the point system. Midnight smiled and commented that this year's group looked promising, especially the 7 students, and asked their names. Cementos ignored Midnight's question, pressed a red button, and said it was too early to decide, since their real quality would be tested now. On the course, Izuku sat on top of a robot, reached for a bottle of green tea at his waist, and noted that his 101st point should be enough. When the ground began to shake, he immediately stood and balanced himself, wondering if it was an earthquake or part of the exam. A shadow behind him grew, and when he turned he realized the robot was enormous. He judged it a 0-pointer gimmick meant to cause a ruckus and worried it could be lethal to a weaker student. He smirked at the sight of examinees running away, feeling disappointed by their retreat. He noticed a blue-haired boy with glasses staring at a particular spot. Izuku followed the gaze and saw a young woman trapped nearby. The blue-haired boy shut his eyes and hurried off with the others, which made Izuku frown. Present Mike announced that there were 2 minutes left. Izuku realized the girl might not survive if something went wrong. He could not confidently destroy the robot with his katana alone because he did not know its structure, so he decided to use his inborn quirk. He considered his Fire Breathe quirk, also known as Dragon's Breathe, an evolved form of that ability. He recalled the unusual property of his body. His skin could produce breath when he wanted, allowing him to breathe even if his mouth or throat were blocked. With that ability, he believed he could save the girl. He worried that his special move would take a full minute to prepare, but judged that time sufficient. He braced himself, focused, and called upon his quirk. He gathered and compressed his breath and then released it in a concentrated beam that formed a dragon-shaped figure as it flew forward. The Dragon Annihilation beam struck the robot in a dramatic anime-style display of flames and light, and the machine collapsed in a spectacular, non-graphic explosion of sparks and smoke. Debris scattered across the area, and some pieces tumbled toward the trapped woman. Using his flame breath, Izuku formed a whip that would not burn what it held and used it to pull the young woman to safety. He supported her as she stood. He asked if she was all right, and the brown-haired girl with a round face responded that she was and thanked him. Meanwhile, Katsuki scoffed and decided to use his quirk. Salvio, Shoto, and Jack prepared their techniques as well, while Vincent planned to target the robot's head with their self-made methods. The group remembered that a century ago some of the most powerful techniques for the quirkless had been suppressed by the Commission for their danger, and they had learned the strongest known techniques from that era. Knowing how risky those moves could be in this setting, Katsuki, Izuku, and Shoto chose to use their quirks, while others employed different powerful techniques adequate to take down the robot. Katsuki unleashed howitzer impact. Shoto executed Heavenly Pierce, burning ice, creating a massive column of ice in an impressive display. Jamie used gravitational rip. Vincent employed Archangel style, shining cross. Salvio used Underworld Shadow Spike. Jack performed Permafrost. Across the different grounds the effects were spectacular and stylized rather than gory. In Ground Alpha, everyone was stunned by the power of Katsuki's impact. In Ground Charlie, Shoto's enormous ice formation left everyone awed. In Ground Delta, the robot collapsed as if squeezed and fell apart dramatically. In Ground Echo, the machine was sliced into an X and toppled, causing the earth to tremble. In Ground Foxtrot, shadows combined into a towering dark spiky construct that split the robot in two. In Ground Gamma, intense cold froze the robot, causing its systems to malfunction under the extreme temperature. The results were dramatic, cinematic, and clearly the product of powerful quirk techniques. The teachers watching the monitors grew excited. All Might pointed out that fighting a virtual villain, especially a zero-pointer, usually earned no credit, but emphasized that moments of heroism and self-sacrifice still shone through in such situations. Principal Nizu bounced in his seat with delight, noting that he had been watching Izuku since the beginning of the practical exam because Izuku had answered one of his difficult questions perfectly. Vlad responded in awe that the 7 were special and that, based on their quirk usage, it appeared they had all employed their quirk's special moves. Aizawa asked what their points were. Nizu usually did not take particular interest in students, but this time he found himself intrigued by these 7. Nizu explained that they would know once rescue points were awarded, since each of the 7 had saved 1 or 2 people from the explosion when the robots appeared. The teachers nodded, smiled, and raised their points in agreement. Nizu assigned 10 points for himself. All Might added 10. Aizawa and Cementos each gave 9. Midnight, Power Loader, Vlad, Snipe, and Ectoplasm each awarded 10. Gran Torino gave 7. The total rescue points for the 7 students came to Nizu, then announced the top-ranking students. Bakugo Katsuki had villain points of 107 and rescue points of 105, for a total of Midoriya Izuku had villain points of 101 and rescue points of 105, totaling Todoroki Shoto had villain points of 100 and rescue points of 105, totaling Salvio Prince and Jack Foster each had villain points of 96 and rescue points of 105, totaling 201 for both. Jamie Miles had villain points of 95 and rescue points of 105, totaling Vincent Grid had villain points of 89 and rescue points of 105, totaling Nizu declared that the ranks 1 through 7 were decided and expressed his happiness at having them in the school, noting that their written examination results were good enough for the hero course. That night in the apartment, Kigo prepared dinner while asking how the test had gone. The group had been wandering around Mizudafu earlier. For Katsuki, Shoto, and Izuku the area was unfamiliar, so the day had felt new and exciting. After the exam they had gone out to have fun on their skateboards. Izuku answered that the exam had been easy. He reported that he had scored 101 points, Shoto had 100, and Katsuki had he added that Katsuki seemed likely to be the top student. Kigo then asked about the other 4, gesturing toward the exhausted group. Izuku replied that Salvio and Jack each had 96 points, Jamie had 95, and Vincent had he smiled broadly and said they were confident they would get into the hero course with those scores. Kigo suggested they have dinner. It was unexpected for someone like Kigo to be such a capable cook. In fact, Katsuki had learned how to cook from Kigo, and Kigo often took over the kitchen even when there was a cook on staff. Izuku felt a brief pang of sympathy for the cook but noted that the commission continued to pay him, so it was probably all right. A week earlier in the faculty room, Nizu and All Might were the only ones left, discussing who would be in Class 1A and who would be in Class 1B. Nizu turned his attention to the 7 youths and asked All Might what he thought. All Might answered that they all had great abilities and might even match a young Mirio, but he wanted to see their determination to become heroes and understand their motivations. His expression showed hesitation and concern for his own health. Nizu reminded him that it had been 5 years since his last fight with All for One. All Might acknowledged that he had lost a partner and sustained severe injuries in that battle. He had been the only holder of the quirk to inflict significant damage on that enemy, but the cost had been high. The injuries had taken a toll on his body. He returned to his original, thinner form and sighed. Nizu asked if this related to the future that Night Eye had foretold. All Might confirmed that it did and added that the prediction had left him anxious. Nizu admitted that he too feared what might happen, especially now that the year ahead would be busy and the students would be moving into new roles. All Might hoped to find a successor worthy of the quirk. Nizu noted that among the 7, Midoriya, Todoroki, and Bakugo seemed like potential users of One for All. All Might observed that young Bakugo enjoyed fighting while the other 2 preferred restraint. He had noticed that Midoriya stopped when his score reached 101 and Todoroki behaved similarly, which suggested caution or awareness. They discussed the students' backgrounds, which Nizu found hard to believe: the son of a billionaire, the son of Fire Dragon, and the son of Endeavor. On top of that, some of them had been publicly announced as deceased. Nizu wondered what would happen if the public learned their true names. For the time being, he proposed keeping their identities top secret and instructing them not to introduce themselves by surname. He had a sense that something might occur when the school year began. All Might shared the concern and hoped that All for One would not target any of his students. A week later, the letter from UA arrived. Katsuki reacted with visible excitement as he held the envelope that Kigo had brought in. Kigo explained that only one letter had come and that it likely contained results for the group together, which Izuku found reasonable and convenient. Kigo suggested they open the envelope, and everyone gathered in the living room. Vincent worried that he might be left out because his score had been the lowest among them, even though the passing score was 55 and scoring above 80 was comfortably within the range for the hero course. Izuku had already estimated a 73% chance that they would all be placed in the same class. Shoto reassured Vincent that he had more than enough points to qualify and that if exam proctors had observed them during the test, their heroic deeds would have been noticed. Shoto added kindly that Vincent was the kindest among them and had nothing to worry about. Shoto smiled gently, acting like a brother to the others. Kigo opened the envelope and found two items inside: a paper and a small holographic device. They set the paper aside and activated the device. A familiar, muscular man appeared and delivered the announcement with his booming presence. All Might announced that the 7 of them had been placed together in a single class. He explained that the hero course had expanded from 20 to 25 students for both Class 1A and 1B, and that all 7 had been assigned to Class 1A. He played a replay of their highlights from the recent examination, showing their battles against low-ranking villains and the moments when they saved lives. He then revealed that their villain points were more than enough for acceptance, but the judges had added special rescue points because of those heroic acts. Each of them had gained 105 rescue points, and most of them had surpassed the historical record for the school. A leaderboard appeared, and they all absorbed how far ahead their scores were compared to the 8th rank position. All Might declared them absolutely accepted, announced that their advisor would be a pro-hero who operated more quietly than the usual celebrity types, and said that he himself would be one of their teachers. He finished by telling them to see each other at the start of the school year on the first Monday of April and to strive to go beyond. The recording ended, leaving the group momentarily silent. Izuku took the paper and went over the numbers, noting that Kaken held first place with 212 points, he had 206, Shogun had 205, Salvio and Jack had 201, Jamie had 200, and Vincent had he observed that they had perhaps pushed themselves too hard. Kigo asked what was on the letter, and Izuku explained that it contained reminders. They needed to design hero costumes and handle other school-related matters, and the school had instructed them to conceal 3 of their surnames, likely related to Izuku's and Shogun's fathers. Izuku said the request seemed connected to his family and Shogun's family. Kigo reflected that Endeavor had long been in contact with the school administration, so it made sense that their identities would be protected. He added that at the school festival in June, the truth would probably come out. Kigo suggested that if their parents knew they were alive, some parents might try to take them away from their current households while others might distance themselves out of guilt. He said Sho's father might be more likely to attempt to take him, while the kinder parents of the others might struggle with feelings of unworthiness. Shoto responded that no matter what their parents did, he intended to return. When Vincent asked why, Shoto said he remembered only fragments but knew that his father had trained his older brother, Tuya, in a way that had been brutal and relentless. The training had damaged Tuya's body and cost him much of his freedom, and Shoto felt that their father had shown no remorse. Jack scoffed and voiced his anger, saying he hoped their father would be held accountable for his actions. Izuku and his partner expressed their agreement and comforted each other. Time passed and the group of 7 trained together before the school year began. They sparred with Kigo many times for practice, but he remained faster than their natural quirks. On the first day of high school, they left the household and boarded their van for the academy where they had been accepted. The acceptance rate for the hero course at UA was strict, fewer than 300 accepted in total, with 7 admitted by recommendation and 43 through the exams. There were only 2 classes of 25 students each. Upon arriving, Izuku looked over the expansive campus and wondered where Class 1A was. Salvio pointed to a massive door 3 times taller than Izuku. They opened the door and found a classroom filled with students already seated. Izuku observed a student with a striking crow-like presence and another young man with indigo hair, pondering whether that student's quirk might involve mental influence. A familiar voice called to the group, and Izuku realized he recognized the girl who had removed an object's gravity during the exam. He identified her as the gravity-manipulating student, and she was surprised when she suddenly found herself seated, as if the 7 had vanished from where they stood. A tired-looking man wrapped in a sleeping bag spoke in a flat tone and said that the 7 of them must have sensed his presence. He introduced himself as the teacher and told them to change into gym uniforms and head to the PE ground. Izuku recognized him as Aizawa, whose worn appearance matched the pro-hero known as Eraserhead. They followed his instructions, changed, and went to the field. Eraserhead waited alone before the circle set up for a softball throw. He announced that they would begin quirk assessment tests. Several students protested that there had been no ceremony or orientation, but Eraserhead said that aspiring heroes did not have time for ceremony and that UA was known for its direct, hands-on approach. Eraserhead explained that they would start with physical fitness tests without using quirks, following long-standing standards used to calculate averages across the country. He criticized the system for its rigid reliance on uniform results and muttered that the Ministry of Education was being complacent. Then he directed his attention to Katsuki and asked whether Katsuki had come in first in the practical exam. The other students stared at Katsuki with curiosity as Eraserhead asked how many meters his softball throw had reached in junior high. Katsuki replied indifferently that it had been 77 meters. Eraserhead tossed a ball to him and told him he could do anything within the circle and to give it his all. Katsuki averted his gaze from the field, began stretching, and planned to add an explosive blast to his throw. He launched the throw with a shout, the blast propelling the ball far beyond normal reach. Eraserhead watched the device he was using, waiting for the result. Eraserhead showed the class the device, which registered 705.2 meters. The students reacted in a mixture of disbelief and excitement. The young man with yellow hair and a black lightning mark in his hair expressed surprise. The pink-haired girl with an alien-like appearance smiled and said it looked fun. The man with straight black hair noted that using quirks was expected in the course. Eraserhead warned anyone whose attitude was only about having fun that UA expected dedication, and then announced that the lowest overall scorer across the 8 categories would be considered hopeless and expelled. He added that UA would continue to push them throughout the 3 years and closed by invoking the school's motto, "Further Beyond," urging them to give everything. The tests began: ball throw, standing long jump, 50-meter dash, long-distance run, grip strength, repeated side steps, seated toe touch, and sit-ups. These were the exams all of them took. Eraserhead activated the device's holographic display and revealed the rankings. The order was: first Katsuki, second Izuku, third Shoto, fourth Jamie Miles, fifth Salvio Prince, sixth Vincent Grid, seventh Jack Foster, eighth Yairozu Momo, ninth Iida Tenya, 10th Tokoyami Fumikage, 11th Shoji Mizo, 12th Shinso Hitoshi, 13th Ojiro Mashireo, 14th Kirishima Ijiro, 15th Ishido Mina, 16th Uraraka Achiko, 17th Koda Koji, 18th Sato Rikido, 19th Azui 2, 20th Aoyama Yuga, 21st Siro Hanta, 22nd Kaminari Denki, 23rd Jiro Kyoka, 24th Hagakure Toru, and 25th Mineta Minoru. Mineta cried that he was last, and Eraserhead reassured him that being last was just a reason to work harder, advising Mineta to train his body more. Eraserhead turned off the device, instructed everyone to change, and said they would discuss the school's basic rules later. He grabbed his sleeping bag and left the classroom. The students followed his order and went to change. In the boys' locker room, Kaminari remarked that the first day of the hero course was completely different from middle school. Siro agreed enthusiastically that it was challenging. Kaminari asked 3 classmates why they had only used first names earlier, since he hadn't heard their surnames. Izuku explained that the school wanted to hide their identities for certain reasons. Katsuki, annoyed, told them not to ask further and made it clear he was protective of Izuku and Shoto whenever others got too close. The other male students watched him silently as he changed into his uniform. Izuku smiled and tried to calm things, and Shoto nodded to show he understood Katsuki's attitude. Katsuki finished changing and scorned Izuku briefly before everyone finished and headed back to their room. Eraserhead addressed the class with the day's orientation, explaining rules and teaching methods. He asked each student to introduce themselves by name and quirk, then began calling seats 1 through 25. Aoyama Yuga introduced himself and gave his quirk as Naval Laser. Ashido Mina introduced herself with the quirk Acid. Azuitiu asked to be called Tsu and stated her quirk was Frog. Iida Tenya introduced himself with the quirk Engine. Uraraka Achiko said her quirk was Zero Gravity. Ojiro Mashireo announced his quirk as Tail. Kaminari Denki introduced his quirk as Electrification. Kirishima Ijiro declared his quirk was Hardening. Koda Koji identified his quirk as Ani Voice. Sato Rikido gave his quirk as Sugar Rush. Shoji Mizo said his quirk was Dupli Arms. Jiro Kyoka named her quirk Earphone Jack. Shiro Hanta introduced his quirk as Tape. Tokoyami Fumikage stated his quirk was Dark Shadow. Shoto introduced his quirk as Half Cold Half Hot. Hagakure Toru explained her quirk as Invisibility. Katsuki gave his quirk as Explosion. Izuku introduced his quirk as Fire Breath. Mineta Minoru identified his quirk as Pop-Off. Yaoyorozu Momo introduced her quirk as Creation. Jack Foster said his quirk was Ice. Vincent Grid gave his quirk as Quirk Interval. Jamie Miles introduced his quirk as Force Manipulation. Shinso Hitoshi stated his quirk was Brainwash. Salvio Prince introduced his quirk as Shadow. Izuku observed that they all had different and unique personalities. Eraserhead dismissed the group for lunch, telling them not to disturb him and that they would meet again later. The students sighed in relief and headed to the cafeteria. Jack smiled broadly and commented that they could choose any style of food, whether traditional, international, or modern. Because of what he had said, he could still eat his favorite Western dish, Kahlua pig. Katsuki and Jamie ordered spicy curry, Izuku and Jack ordered katsudon, Shoto ordered cold soba, and Salvio and Vincent chose mild curry since they could not handle spicy food like the others. An indigo-haired student, Hitoshi Shinso, approached and asked if he could join them. Izuku had known him because his quirk brainwashing had piqued his interest. Izuku suspected there must be a method to activate it. Izuku smiled and nodded in response, and Hitoshi sat beside him with his food and returned the smile. Izuku then asked bluntly what condition had to be met for the quirk to work. Hitoshi explained that he needed someone to answer a question he posed. If that condition were met, he could use his brainwashing ability. Izuku observed that the quirks seemed to require the target to lower their guard in certain ways and noted that such an ability could resolve a kidnapping or hostage situation. Hitoshi asked whether Izuku thought his quirk was villainous. Izuku replied that people sometimes suffered for having unusual quirks. Vincent and Katsuki had faced bullies and stood up to them, which made remembering those bullies' faces amusing to him. Shoto beside him snickered quietly. Katsuki scoffed arrogantly that he had taught those bullies they were insignificant extras. Shoto, eating calmly, commented that they should not call weak people extras. Izuku urged them not to let others define them, saying that they should forge their own names and paths. Quirks were simply supernatural abilities without inherent moral alignment, and what mattered was how people used them. He said this before taking a bite of his katsudon. Hitoshi reflected on the idea of forging his own name and path, then thanked them with a small, grateful smile. The others smiled back. Katsuki was visibly annoyed that Hitoshi had smiled at Izuku, while Shoto gave a resigned sigh. Denki Kaminari and Ijiro Kirishima arrived holding their own food and asked if they could join the table. Izuku welcomed them, explaining the table seated 10. Kaminari greeted Hitoshi enthusiastically, and Katsuki told him to keep his voice down, calling him a dunce face in an annoyed tone, which made the table chuckle. Jamie clarified that Katsuki used nicknames because he did not remember everyone's names well. He could remember only a few, like their brother and their mentor. Kaminari wondered aloud what being called a dunce face meant. Shoto answered frankly that Kaminari had looked like an idiot earlier. Salvio and Vincent laughed. saying they had seen him acting foolish during a discussion with Mr. Aizawa. After lunch the discussion continued, and eventually the first day of school came to an end. Kaminari suggested they go home together. Shoto said he and the others would stay behind at the Cryas support company down the road to add something to their gear. Jack said they wanted a weapon made there, though the group privately knew that was an excuse. The hero suits that had arrived were disappointing and could not support features like wings, so they had commissioned the support company to recreate their costumes and add modifications. Ashido asked what kind of weapon they wanted. Izuku explained that they were personal weapons with different blueprints for each of them and steered the conversation away from further questions. He noted that some of their quirks, Shoto's nullification and property configuration, Katsuki's seer eyes, and Izuku's absorb and release did not have physical forms, so they wanted suits redesigned to accommodate those abilities more effectively. Kirishima said they should head off, and Mina asked whether the 7 of them were related, surprised by their close-knit group despite different surnames. Vincent calmly explained that they all lived in the same household. 3 of them were Japanese and the others were American. Kaminari reacted in shock. Izuku added that their surnames differed and that they had returned to Japan together. Mina grew excited and asked who had adopted them. Shoto glanced at Izuku and Katsuki, then at the others, and they all nodded and smiled. Shoto explained that they had been adopted by someone else's children, and their current guardian was their oldest brother, Takami Kigo, known as Hawks, though they were not related by blood. Kirishima expressed awe that Hawks was a pro-hero who had transferred from America and was highly ranked there. Salvio mentioned that they had come back to Japan last February, about a week before the UA examination began. Mina asked what it felt like to be adopted by Hawks. Katsuki said that living with a man nicknamed the Chicken Nugget had not been bad, though Hawks could be annoying. Mina asked why they called him that. Izuku explained that Hawks liked chicken nuggets, and that Katsuki also teased him with nicknames. The group laughed as the conversation continued. They talked until they reached the support company. Mina remained talkative, Kirishima tended to listen before speaking, and Kaminari struggled with complicated topics. When they reached the company, they acknowledged that this was where they would part ways. Izuku waved to their new friends and told them he would see them tomorrow. Kaminari waved back with Mina and Kirishima, and they left together. Shoto suggested they go and then opened the door to the company. All 7 walked into the lobby and went straight to the receptionist. The receptionist asked if they were looking for something. Izuku requested Alpha 1 to 1 through Alpha 1. The receptionist froze for a moment and asked for confirmation. The group produced verification cards from their school uniform pockets, which surprised the receptionist. Cyrus Support Company was renowned as the most successful and verified support company in Japan. The top floor housed inventions and major commissions. The 3rd floor stored final products and requests. That floor had 5 sections: Echo for standard equipment, Delta and Charlie for commissions, Beta for pro-hero gear, and Alpha for special individuals. Because their request was for the Alpha section, the receptionist arranged the best possible treatment and led them to the elevator for the 5th floor. On the 5th floor, the 7 were briefly surprised by the neat, precise alignment of products. An older man took the paperwork from the receptionist and confirmed that Alpha 1 to 1 through Alpha 1 to 7 had been commissioned by Hawks, America's number 3 hero. He checked the names from the list and confirmed the group as Midoriya, Todoroki, Bakugo, Grid, Foster, Prince, and Miles. Izuku smiled politely to confirm. The old man led them to the Alpha section and explained the suits. Alpha 1 to 1 through Alpha 1 to 3 were the most difficult to create, made from a natural material that absorbed physical damage and could transform automatically. They had been designed with hidden wings in mind. Alpha 1 to 4 through Alpha 1 to 7 matched the complexity of pro-hero costumes, each with intricate functions and a built-in weapon. He opened the cases to reveal the suits. The suits exceeded their expectations. The group acknowledged their satisfaction and noted that the commission funds had been transferred the day before, asking if the suits could be delivered to their school. The old man asked which school, and Katsuki smirked and identified their school as UA High School. They returned home and resumed their rigorous training, determined not to slack off. Izuku, Katsuki, and Shoto, who each possessed multiple quirks, were especially diligent. They planned a strict daily schedule. Classes ran from 8:25 to 15:10, leaving 3 or 4 hours before dinner for personal training. They practiced their inborn quirks at school on weekdays and devoted 4 hours each day to specialized training. Izuku focused on elements and absorb and release, Shoto on property disfiguration and nullification, and Katsuki on temperature manipulation and seer's eye. Weekends were reserved for practicing wings, gifts, and teleportation, which all of them had. Quirks like Izuku's ultra regeneration, Katsuki's recreation, and Shoto's life force required little active training and were not the primary concern. The next day at school, they began by greeting Aizawa and attending announcements, then moved through English with present mic, modern literature with cementos, modern hero art history with midnight, and mathematics with ectoplasm. At lunchtime the usual group ate together, unsure what the afternoon would bring because of heroics class. All Might entered the heroics classroom with vigorous energy and announced he would be teaching hero basics. The class, except for the 7, the rest of the students, and Shinso, watched him with admiration. Kaminari reacted with excitement, Kirishima beamed at the sight of All Might's Silver Age costume, and Ojiro remarked on how impressive it was. All Might explained that hero basics would cover foundational training across many units and that they would begin with battle training. Some students reacted differently. Izuku regarded the announcement calmly while Katsuki's eagerness for battle was obvious. All Might then opened a set of shelves to reveal the costumes made for the class. He explained that the costumes had been crafted according to each student's requests and quirk registrations, and that some had been altered considerably. Izuku felt a rush of anticipation as he stared at case number 18, where his costume was placed. Class 1A left for the locker rooms to change. They admired their costumes in silence for a moment. Kirishima noticed black sigil tattoos on the backs of Izuku, Katsuki, and Shoto and asked about them. Izuku explained that the tattoos had appeared when their wings first manifested at age 4 and that they had had them for over a decade. Iida asked if the tattoos bothered Izuku. Izuku responded that they had not been a problem during training. Izuku smiled and noted that sometimes it still burned when something triggered their quirk. Shoto observed that he had expected the costumes to be heavier. Izuku agreed, adding that he had especially thought Katsuki's costume would be the heaviest. Katsuki insisted that the costumes were indeed heavy, but their bodies had been trained to handle that weight. Shoto's costume contained the following quirks: half cold, half hot, life force, angel's gift, teleportation, angel wings, property configuration, and nullification. Izuku had a sky blue sword at his waist. His costume reflected his quirks: fire breath, ultra regeneration, dragon's gift, teleportation, dragon wings, elemental control, and absorb and release. Katsuki wore gold and purple swords at his waist, his quirk suite including explosion, recreation, demon's gift, teleportation, demon wings, temperature manipulation, and seer's eyes. A red sword also hung at his side. Salvio carried a black sword. Jack had a blue sword and an ice quirk. Jamie carried a gray sword for force manipulation. Vincent wore a green sword and possessed quirk interval. Kaminari observed that some of them looked like princes while the 3 appeared to belong in a fantasy novel. Shoto replied awkwardly to the comment. Izuku told the others they should go as he left the locker room. All Might announced that appearance mattered too and that from this day forward they should act like heroes. He praised their looks and declared it was time to begin the exercise. Iida asked whether they would use this center for the exam and whether the exercise would be a city battle. All Might explained that although many villain battles were outdoors, villains often operated indoors in confinement and secrecy, so this training would be focused on indoor encounters. All Might said he would split them into hero and villain teams for 2 versus 2 battles, with 3 students placed on one team to accommodate the class roster of 25. Azui asked if there would be no basic training. All Might replied that the exercise was designed to teach basic lessons but that this time there would be no robots to destroy. Yaoyorozu asked about win conditions. Katsuki asked if he could blow things up. Uraraka asked if they would be expelled like in Aizawa's class. Iida asked how the teams would be split. Aoyama flexed his cape and asked if it was cool. All Might acknowledged there were too many questions and produced a cheat sheet to explain. All Might described the scenario. The villains would be hiding a weapon in the building and the heroes must either destroy it or recover it in time. Villains could defend the weapon or capture the heroes. Opponents would be chosen by lots. He then had the students draw their group letters. All Might announced the group assignments. Group A consisted of Uraraka Achiko and Shinso Hitoshi. Group B consisted of Shoji Mizo and Jack Foster. Group C consisted of Yaoyorozu Momo and Mineta Minoru. Group D consisted of Iida Tenya and Vincent Grid. Group E consisted of Ishido Mina and Aoyama Yuga. Group F consisted of Kota Koji and Sato Rikido. Group G consisted of Kaminari Denki and Jiro Kyoka. Group H consisted of Tokoyami Fumikage and Azui Tsu. Group I consisted of Ojiro Mashireo and Hagakure Toru. Group J consisted of Kirishima Ijiro and Shiro Hanta. Group K consisted of Jamie Miles and Salvio Prince. Group L consisted of Izuku, Katsuki, and Shoto. Kaminari protested that it seemed unfair to place the three strongest students on a single team. All Might noted that although the three had drawn Group L together and technically it was acceptable, their combined power already exceeded that of a typical Hero Corps student. He proposed that the team facing Group L would earn the privilege of calling for help from the group that won a previous round, effectively making it 10 against 3. Yaoyorozu questioned the fairness. All Might explained that he knew the three young men's capabilities and that they could easily overpower weaker students. Their agility and physical strength made them dangerous beyond their quirks. Azui asked if this arrangement was acceptable to the three. The class stared at the trio, who smirked confidently, their gazes intimidating the others. For a moment, Izuku reassured everyone that they had been trained for multiple opponents and that it would not be a problem. Katsuki said he wanted to fight, and Shoto responded in a flat tone that it was not a big problem for him. All Might declared the decision final and prepared to draw the teams for the first fight by taking two balls from different boxes. He explained that the white ball would represent the hero and the black ball the villain. For the first match he revealed that Group A would be the heroes and Group D would be the villains. Group A, made up of Shinso Hitoshi and Uraraka Achiko, would face Group D, made up of Iida Tenya and Vincent Grid. Izuku produced a notebook hidden in his costume and read information he had retrieved from the school's database. He had accessed the UA system and entered its records without leaving any clues, as if the access had never occurred. Izuku reviewed the hero and villain profiles. Shinso Hitoshi's brainwash quirk, an emitter type, allowed him to put a target into a state of compelled obedience, activated when the target verbally responded to him. Uraraka Achiko's zero-gravity quirk, also an emitter, allowed her to remove the effects of gravity from solid objects by touching them with the pads on her fingertips, rendering them weightless until she pressed her fingers together to restore normal gravity. Iida Tenya's engine quirk, a mutant type, produced engine-like protrusions that increased his speed, leg power, force, and momentum. Vincent Grid's quirk interval, an emitter type, allowed him to interfere with others' quirks, slowing, countering, manipulating, stopping, or even permanently removing a quirk, though removing a quirk caused Vincent intense pain that could cripple him without proper training. All Might instructed Shinso, Grid, Uraraka, and Iida to enter the first training building where the weapons would be located. The villains were to enter immediately while the heroes would have 5 minutes to plan. The 4 students took the map and rushed toward the building. All Might turned and told everyone to go to the monitoring room to watch the team's performances closely. The group answered in unison that they would. When they reached the monitoring room, All Might activated the virtual and physical monitors positioned around the building. The screens showed that teams A and D had entered the structure and were waiting. 5 minutes had been given for planning. All Might pressed a button and announced over the intercom that the first battle would commence. Team A's Uraraka and Shinso began moving through the building in full guard. Vincent and Iida had been waiting on the 4th floor. Iida expressed concern about Vincent taking the fight on his own. Vincent reassured him that he could disrupt or counter quirks and that speed was on his side, though not on the level of the monster trio. Iida told him to be careful. Vincent did not respond and turned to descend. Vincent admitted to himself that it might be cheating. Izuku had recorded details about their classmates, and they had read it the previous day, so he already knew what many of them were capable of. He believed he could prevent Uraraka from using her quirk but recognized limits to what he could control. His own quirk was powerful and versatile, but it could not manipulate minds or resistances such as lie detection, brainwashing, telepathy, or the like. He had tried and failed to seize control of Izuku's ultra-regeneration, Shoto's life force, and Katsuki's recreation. He also noted that Shinso could use binding cloth that could not easily be broken by sheer force, and he wondered briefly what materials were used to make it. Vincent resolved to use only his light style for the encounter. Archangel style would risk collapsing the building and could be lethal. He moved to the stairs toward the second floor, sword in hand and his guard raised. Using his quirk sense, Vincent closed his eyes and scanned for nearby quirks. He detected Iida on the fourth floor and sensed Uraraka's presence on the second. He could not sense Shinso's quirk, and that made him change his grip on the katana so he could strike with the blunt side if necessary. In the monitoring room, Kaminari observed that the area around Vincent felt strange. Shoto explained nonchalantly that something was missing. Kirishima asked what that was, and Izuku pointed out that there were no footsteps, which created an uneasy feeling. Mina asked if his silence was part of his quirk. Katsuki explained that Vincent had trained in assassin techniques. One of his core skills was stealth, moving without being heard or sensed by a target. Kirishima found the idea impressive, and many in Class 1A became more interested in Vincent, who usually kept to his own group. All Might leaned toward Izuku and quietly asked if the commission had taught those techniques. Izuku confirmed that their brother, who had been part of the commission, had trained them with the chairman's permission and that they had learned many fighting techniques and developed their own styles. All Might acknowledged that the commission was the only known organization that used assassin methods and thanked Izuku for the confirmation. Izuku, remembering stories his brother had told long ago, said he would not elaborate and would simply watch Vincent take the win. All Might and Izuku both turned their attention to the screens. Vincent moved casually while Uraraka and Shinso crept more cautiously, avoiding noise that might reveal their positions. Vincent then heard a faint movement and rushed toward it, spotting Uraraka and Shinso together, peering into a room. Vincent activated light style, blinding lights. Shinso immediately sensed something wrong and reacted with his binding cloth, quickly stepping out of direct sight as he prepared his counter. When the binding cloth flew toward Vincent, he recognized its danger. If it stuck, it could immobilize him. His fighting styles emphasized speed and agility rather than controlling the path of projectiles, so he had to adapt on the fly. He held back a frustrated breath and sprang forward. Shinso instructed Uraraka to find the training prop bomb while he focused on Vincent. Uraraka nodded and ran off to search. Vincent noted that Iida was still stationed above, so the situation for now was manageable. Vincent watched as the binding cloth moved in an intricate, unpredictable pattern. He retreated several meters to avoid being ensnared. In the monitoring room, Jiro wondered aloud whether Uraraka and Shinso's quirks were suited for combat. All Might replied with a smile that neither quirk was designed for fighting, which was why those two had trained their bodies for physical combat. Kirishima watched with admiration. Back in the building, Vincent analyzed the earlier attack and concluded that Shinso's maneuvers with the cloth were a specific style or technique. Shinso muttered that it must be amazing to be the brothers of the monster trio. Vincent remained silent. He knew that answering could give Shinso an opening to use his brainwashing ability. Shinso then taunted Vincent about feeling inferior to the powerful trio and the others with combat-oriented quirks, questioning Vincent's support role. He launched another barrage with his binding cloth neutral style, hard bind barrage. Vincent paused, assessed the incoming patterns, and began to dodge, relying on speed and precise movement to avoid being trapped. He steadied himself and prepared his next move. Shinso continued provoking Vincent, asking why Vincent had been with them in the first place, his words sharp and deliberate. Vincent could not take it any longer and broke free, dashing toward Shinso while evading the binding cloth. Shinso sensed the danger and started retreating a few meters while using his cloth to bind and defend. Vincent closed the distance despite the bindings and used the blunt of his katana with a technique called light style, blunt Sunday. He vanished briefly and reappeared behind Shinso, delivering a precise, non-lethal strike with the blunt edge that left Shinso dizzy and falling to his knees, struggling to stay conscious. Vincent placed his katana back in its scabbard and, with a solemn expression, explained that seeing the others had made him feel inferior, but not frustrated. He had admired them and wanted to stand beside them to fight, train, and become a hero together, a promise they had made when they were 8. Shinso heard the words but was too dazed to respond. He murmured and then collapsed to the ground. The villain team was declared the winners. The exercise ended with the villain's victory after Iida intercepted Uraraka before she could touch the mock bomb. Vincent carried Shinso to the monitoring room and laid him on a couch near the classroom to rest. Shinso had no visible injuries and did not need medical attention. He had simply lost consciousness. All Might addressed the class and asked who should be named MVP of the exercise. Yaoyorozu Momo asked for clarification on what criteria he meant. All Might specified that he meant combat, strategy, strength, and overall performance. Yaoyorozu concluded that the MVP would be grid. Izuku stepped forward with an analysis, saying that Vincent was the MVP across those terms. He explained that in combat and strength Vincent came first and Shinso second, with Iida and Uraraka following. In terms of strategy, Vincent's team had split into 2, demonstrating trust, teamwork, and communication qualities that marked them as reliable. By contrast, Shinso and Uraraka had shown trust and teamwork but lacked clear communication, as Uraraka had simply agreed to Shinso's plan without discussion. Overall, Vincent had shown patience by finding and ambushing 2 teams, though charging in head-on was reckless. Izuku would rate the performance a 7 out of 10. All Might agreed with the assessment and elaborated that Iida and Vincent had understood each other's movements. Iida trusted Vincent's ability and they had executed their roles with communication and coordination. He emphasized that being a hero was not only about strength but also about those character traits. All Might smiled and asked if everyone was clear, and the class responded affirmatively. He then selected 2 markers to determine roles, Team B as heroes and Team I as villains. Midoriya opened his notebook and checked the team assignments. Team B consisted of Shoji Mizo and Jack Foster. Team I consisted of Ojiro Mashireo and Hagakure Toru. Midoriya reviewed their profiles. Shoji Mizo's quirk, dupli arms, granted him tentacle-like appendages that could transform their tips into copies of other body parts, with those duplicates often functioning more efficiently than the originals. Jack Foster's quirk allowed him precise control over ice. He could create and reinforce ice on himself and adjust its effects on targets. Ojiro Mashireo's quirk gave him a large, powerful tail he could use like an extra limb for movement and combat. Hagakure Toru's quirk rendered her invisible by allowing light to pass through her, making her undetectable. Midoriya considered Hagakure's utility for stealth and the possibility that Ojiro's tail could be adapted to martial arts techniques. Katsuki asked Shoto and Izuku what they thought. Both smirked and chuckled, and they answered in unison that they would attempt something large. Katsuki laughed, and Izuku scoffed, noting that they were brothers in spirit if not by blood, bound by their connection. At another building site, Ojiro and Hagakure prepared a mock bomb on the 7th floor of a 10-story building, while Jack Foster and Shoji Mizo planned their approach. Shoji asked Jack for the plan. Jack suggested using Shoji's ability to duplicate parts of his body as a way to locate Hagakure, since the duplicates could be transformed into sensory tools. Shoji created several ear-like duplicates along one arm. Jack asked whether those duplicates could hear beyond the 4th floor. Shoji replied that his duplicates could improve his hearing by about 3 times, so detecting sounds above the 4th floor would be infeasible with his current capacity. Jack smiled and said they would simplify the plan accordingly. Shoji felt a sudden intimidation from Jack and paused for a moment, thinking that Jack was frightening. In the monitoring room, Shinso had already woken up and immediately apologized to Vincent for his earlier harsh words. Vincent accepted the apology. Mina asked what everyone thought would happen in the battle. Kirishima muttered that if Vincent was already strong with only his quirk interval ability, Jack would probably be stronger. All Might responded enthusiastically that he was curious what young Foster would do in the matchup. Kirishima then asked the trio for their opinion. The class turned their attention to them. Shoto observed that Jack had a brash charm, a tendency to flirt and to bring chaos. He acted recklessly at times but remained loyal to those he acknowledged as comrades. Izuku smiled at Jack's notorious reputation. Katsuki scoffed that Jack would likely end the battle quickly in a convenient way. Azui asked if they were predicting how Jack would finish the match. Salvio said that Jack was the easiest for the 6 of them to predict. Jairu asked what Jack would probably do, and Izuku refused to spoil it. Shoto interrupted Kirishima to give a clue instead. Whatever Jack did would surprise everyone and make them question whether they were ready for the hero course. The class bristled briefly at the suggestion, and Izuku noted that their quirks were interesting but had room to grow. All Might advised that if anyone felt unworthy, they should push beyond their limits to catch up. The rest of the students, excluding the trio and Jamie's group, replied that they understood and returned their attention to the monitor, faces full of expectation. All Might then told the young heroes over the communication system that they could go in. Shoji and Jack acknowledged and began walking toward the building where the villains were located. Meanwhile, the villains had their plan. Ojiro prepared to stay behind while Hagakure would sneak in among the heroes and capture them. Hagakure left the monitoring area and went down to the 6th floor. The heroes paused about 5 meters from the building's entrance. Jack asked if Shoji had heard anything from the lower floors. Shoji reported no movement. Jack stepped forward and used his ability to encase the entire building in ice in an instant. Shoji froze in place at the power of the display. In the monitoring room, classmates widened their eyes in disbelief. Kirishima, sweating, exclaimed that it was incredible and overwhelming. Kaminari muttered confusion at Jack's strength. Mineta, looking toward the trio, began to wonder how powerful they must be. Shoto remarked matter-of-factly that their full power would be overwhelming compared to Jack's usual display. Katsuki scoffed that even if several other students challenged them, they had trained those opponents and expected them to lose. Izuku admitted, with a small laugh, that theoretically they could level the area if they used their entire power. The class thought in unison that it was best not to underestimate them. Jack and Shoji split up to search for the bomb. They found Hagakure trapped in ice on the 6th floor and discovered the bomb and an immobilized Ojiro on the 7th floor. Jack walked past Ojiro, touched the bomb to secure it, and All Might announced over the system that the hero team had won. Jack immediately destroyed the ice holding Ojiro, and they went to the 6th floor to free Hagakure as well. The rescued students returned to the monitoring room and the matchups continued. After Team A versus Team D and Team B versus Team I, the next rounds progressed. Hero Team F, Kota Koji and Sato Rikido, faced Villain Team C, Yairo Zumomo and Minoru Mineta. Villain Team C won by blocking the doors and using a trap that immobilized the hero team. Hero Team G, Kaminari Denki and Jairu Kyoka, faced Villain Team E, Ashido Mina and Aoyama Yuga. Hero Team G won by collapsing the villain's floor and incapacitating them using Kaminari's quirk. Hero Team H, Tokoyami Fumikage and Azui Tu, faced Villain Team J, Kirishima Ijiro and Shiro Hanta. Villain Team J won by surrounding the entire floor with Shiro's tape, which reduced the effectiveness of Tokoyami and Tsuyu's quirks in that environment. Now only Team K, Jamie Miles and Salvio Prince, and Team L, Izuku, Katsuki and Shoto, remained. The whole class grew excited but were unsurprised by the capabilities already displayed. All Might asked whether Miles and Prince wanted help from Teams D, B, C, G, and J. Salvio and Jamie exchanged a look and nodded silently. Jamie reasoned that with Vincent and Jack's support they could handle about 40% of their opponent's overall combat ability and that, if the winners combined forces, they had a chance. Katsuki scoffed, thinking that Miles and Prince did not know the trio's new special techniques. Izuku opened his notebook and reviewed the villain team profiles once more. He noted Iida Tenya's quirk, Engine, which increased his speed, leg power, and momentum through engine-like protrusions, and Vincent Grid's quirk, Quirk Interval, which allowed Vincent to interfere with targets' quirks by slowing, countering, manipulating, stopping, or even removing them. Permanently removing a quirk from a target caused Vincent intense pain that could leave him crippled without proper physical training. Name, Shoji Mizo Team B. Quirk, Dupli Arms, Mutant. Description, Mizo's quirk grants him a set of tentacles alongside his arms. He can transform the tips of these tentacles to replicate other parts of his body. His duplicated body parts are often more efficient than his originals. Name, Jack Foster, Team B. Quirk, Ice, Emitter. Description, Jack's quirk gives him absolute authority over ice. He can create and reinforce it on his body and alter the effectiveness of other targets' quirks by reinforcing his ice. Name, Yaoyorozu Momo, Team C. Quirk, Creation, Emitter. Description, Creation allows the user to materialize different objects, such as weapons and tools, from any part of their body. Name, Mineta Minoru Team C. Quirk, Pop-Off, Mutant. Description, Pop-Off allows the user to produce sticky spheres from their head that they can pluck painlessly. Once Mineta removes one sphere, a new one grows in its place almost instantly. The spheres adhere to any surface they touch, except for Mineta himself. Name, Kaminari Denki, Team G. Quirk, Electrification, Emitter. Description, Electrification lets the user charge with electricity and emit it as a protective aura that shocks anyone who touches them, leaving them slightly paralyzed. If he emits enough electricity, it discharges in all directions, affecting anyone nearby. It also allows Kaminari to act as a lightning rod. Name, Gyokyoka, Team G. Quirk, Earphone Jack, Mutant. Description, Earphone Jack grants long, controllable earlobes that function like headphone cables. Kyoka's earlobes end in jacks she can plug into objects and channel vibrations, allowing her to affect those objects from within. Name, Kirishima Ijiro, Team J. Quirk, Hardening, Transformation. Description, Hardening lets the user toughen any part of their body. The quirk protects against most physical threats and allows Kirishima to endure hazards that would otherwise be lethal. Name, Sirohanta, Team J. Quirk, Tape, Mutant. Description, Tape allows the user to eject adhesive tape from openings on both elbows. Name, Salvio Prince, Team K. Quirk, Shadow, Emitter. Description, Shadow lets him control shadows linked to his senses. He can activate the quirk whenever he wants, even if incapacitated or blindfolded. Name, Jamie Miles, Team K. Quirk, Force Manipulation, Emitter. Description, Force Manipulation allows him to control force-related properties such as acceleration, mass, gravity, and friction. Izuku examined the opponent's quirks and considered Mineta's pop-off a potential nuisance, but he judged Mineta's throwing skills slow and inaccurate enough that their group could avoid them. He noted that their gift quirks Angel's Gift, Demon's Gift, and Dragon's Gift would help detect any traps. Shoto thought he should conserve his own quirk since Vincent was on the villain's side. Vincent could potentially use that against him or their brothers. He watched Vincent and recognized that emitter-type quirks made for a bad matchup with his own abilities. At the same time, Shoto decided they should not overly restrain themselves, reasoning that their quirk control was superior to Vincent's and could work to their advantage because Vincent's drawback was severe. Izuku observed that Vincent struggled to control mental-based quirks and particularly powerful quirks. He realized Shinso's brainwash, being mental in nature, would be difficult for Vincent to counter. Izuku also thought that if Vincent attempted to control a quirk stronger than his own, his body would react violently and leave him incapacitated. He stared at Vincent for a moment, then returned to his notebook. All Might chuckled and told young Izuku, Katsuki, Shoto, and the villain teams to proceed to building site number 6. He amended his plan and allowed them to use the entire fake city ground for the match. The students all responded affirmatively. 6 teams moved out across the ground and the villain teams left the hero team to place their bombs somewhere in the fake city. Shoto asked in a flat tone what their plan was. Izuku explained that they would handle opponents while searching for the bomb and that splitting up would make the search easier. Katsuki smirked and boasted that he could defeat anyone who got in his way. Izuku warned Katsuki to keep his quirk output low, between 1 and 10%, and to use only explosion. Katsuki replied sarcastically but agreed. Izuku sighed at Katsuki's attitude and hoped his opponents would be alright by the end of the battle. In the monitoring room, Shinso admitted she was worried about how destructive the monster trio could be if they fought their brothers. She worried that using their quirks in the fake city might cause major damage. Iida agreed that if someone froze a 10-story building or used other powerful quirk combinations, collapse was possible. All Might acknowledged the risk and explained that allowing use of the whole area reduced danger to their real surroundings. He turned back to the monitors. All Might watched as the villains finished preparations and the heroes took their positions. When the trio on the monitors began to look bored, All Might announced that the heroes could begin. Izuku asked to confirm the remaining time at 10 minutes and 57 seconds. Shoto muttered that he thought they had been waiting for 12 minutes already. Katsuki grinned and urged them to move and defeat their opponents. Izuku sighed and scratched the back of his head. The class watched closely from the monitors, eager to see the students in action. Moments later, Izuku, Shoto, and Katsuki disappeared from the monitor, prompting Uraraka to exclaim in surprise and ask where they had gone. Sato pointed to another screen and indicated that they had split in different directions. The monitor showed Katsuki standing atop a 5-story building. All Might pointed to another monitor, showing Izuku walking through the area. Shoto was nowhere to be seen. They did not know that Shoto had already hidden after spotting 2 opponents, Kaminari and Jiraiya. Shoto stepped back and a loose rock crumbled underfoot with a faint crunch. Kaminari asked if anyone had heard something. Jiraiya said she would check. As Jiraiya prepared to use her quirk to listen through the walls, Shoto acted and quickly froze both of them. Kaminari complained that the ice was painfully cold. Shoto apologized in a flat tone. All Might announced that young Kaminari and Jiraiya had been captured by Shoto. Katsuki and Izuku exchanged satisfied smiles, noting that 2 opponents were already out of the running, leaving 10 more. Katsuki immediately leapt from the building and used his quirk to propel himself through the air. The blast from his palm alerted 4 students: Shiro, Kirishima, Yaoyorozu, and Mineta. Katsuki rushed at Shiro and unleashed 30% of his explosion quirk. Smoke billowed and filled the area. Katsuki realized he had missed Shiro and felt instead a crunchy thud under his fist. He smirked, thinking Kirishima pejoratively calling him that shitty hair was more capable than expected. Something else moved toward Katsuki. He instinctively dodged an attack the other person had hoped would catch him. Katsuki laughed at the sight of Yaoyorozu's thermal goggles and used the smoke as cover to sprint toward her. A purple projectile zipped past and lodged in a nearby wall. Shiro tried to grab Katsuki with his tape, but Katsuki seized the end, yanked Shiro close, and punched him, sending the smoke billowing and a gust of wind in his wake. Mineta looked at Katsuki in alarm. Katsuki muttered that only 2 opponents remained and dashed for Mineta, who had no real combat skills. Katsuki struck hard and rendered Mineta unconscious in an instant. He turned to see Yaoyorozu preparing a spear attack and easily sidestepped. Choosing not to use a lethal move, Katsuki employed a swift technique bearless hand style, instant chop, and executed a precise, non-graphic strike that incapacitated Yaoyorozu, leaving the group on the ground while he began searching for the simulated bomb. All Might announced that Yaoyorozu, Kirishima, Mineta, and Shiro had been eliminated by Katsuki. He also reported that Shoto had captured Shoji and Iida on the other side. Meanwhile, Izuku had located the bomb. It was guarded by Vincent, Jamie, Salvio, and Jack. Izuku considered that fighting them head-on would be long and troublesome. He resolved to dodge their attacks and disarm them quickly. Izuku charged, drawing his sword. Vincent noticed immediately and readied his quirk in anticipation. Izuku executed a move with assassin sword style. He vanished from sight and reappeared in front of Jack. Jack used ice to block the strike. Salvio attempted to bind Izuku with shadow tendrils, but Izuku anticipated it and vaulted free. Using lightless style, air dash, Izuku turned the air beneath him into a temporary platform and closed on Vincent, whose quirk made him troublesome. Vincent dodged, but Izuku followed with another technique, bearless hand style, instant sleep. A precise, non-graphic strike rendered Vincent unconscious and kept him out of the match for 10 minutes. Jamie tried to remove friction from the ground to disrupt Izuku's footing, but because Izuku had studied their personalities and tendencies, he anticipated the move and used air dash to spring back into the air. While airborne, Izuku prepared a new, untested technique. Midoriya Original, Illusion Style. Phantom Ghost allowed him to leave afterimages at incredible speed. He rematerialized behind Jamie, Salvio, and Jack, and the technique produced the effect of a rapid series of blows that struck their pressure points, leaving them disoriented and temporarily paralyzed. Jamie cursed in confusion as he tumbled. Izuku had designed Phantom Ghost alongside his other styles Wave, Sound, and Dragon. The technique created afterimages at near-light speed and landed many consecutive hits in a blur, targeting acupuncture points to induce temporary paralysis. With the guards immobilized, Izuku reached the bomb and disabled it. All Might declared the hero team the winners. The day ended with a shared sense of satisfaction and surprise among the students. Class wrapped up after a final discussion led by All Might, and the students left feeling more excited about their training than they had expected. Vincent, Jamie, Jack, and Salvio returned home at once and began their training regimen. Izuku sat to the side of the training room, exhausted, and reflected that UA's lessons so far focused on control and basic use of quirks rather than pushing limits. He thought the #1 hero school should eventually include training that encourages students to expand their quirks' capabilities, but reminded himself that it was only the second day and more would surely come. Izuku watched Vincent and Jack spar and considered how their training always pushed them to go beyond their limits. Izuku thought about what they had been doing for the past 7 years. He remembered that their brother had told them to rest for a week or two, but they always refused. Hawks had been worried and had asked them to take breaks, yet they remained stubborn. Izuku considered that their brother only helped them with training and that they alone chose their schedule and regime. He sighed and wondered if he should ask Katsuki and Shoto to rest every day or at least once a week. He slowly realized they were pushing themselves because they believed strength was the essence of becoming heroes. Izuku stood up and went to speak with Katsuki and Shoto to start a discussion. The next morning, on Wednesday, the 7 of them headed to school. Along the way they encountered several interviewers asking about All Might. Izuku thought that news of All Might being a teacher had spread and that it would be better to ignore the reporters. He did not want their faces exposed to the media. They were not ready. They passed the reporters, including a persistent woman journalist, and went into their classroom to sit in their seats. With only 7 of them in the room, they relaxed and casually talked about future plans, temporarily forgetting the commotion outside. Katsuki asked about any news regarding their manager. Izuku replied that Ronalyn had not contacted them since arriving in Japan and wondered whether they should ask her about the plans for the songs they had composed a week earlier. Ronalyn had always seemed responsible, so her silence was strange. Shoto noted that they still did not know when they would hold a concert in Japan, not as hero-in-training students but as band members of Reverse. Jamie leaned back and searched his phone for any news, wondering if Ronalyn had been pressured by the entertainment industry after they announced a temporary break. Vincent pointed out that they had only been gone for a month and had not even finished the first week of school. Katsuki frowned at the idea that their worldwide fame made the industry impatient and regretted that they had not revealed their faces at debut, which might have made their situation clearer. Izuku said that if they revealed their faces, their lives would not be private. Paparazzi would follow them everywhere. Salvio asked if their band's herogram was still active. Jack said he still used it. Salvio then suggested announcing something to divert fans' attention. Izuku asked what he meant. Salvio proposed they schedule a regular live stream every Saturday to perform their songs, and Katsuki smirked at the idea. Shoto agreed in his usual flat tone. Jack prepared to add a thought when the door opened and Jiro, Momo, Tokoyami, and Shuji entered. The 7 of them stopped talking as the clock read 8:22, 8 minutes before class started. Fortunately, no one had heard their conversation. Otherwise, their identity as Reverse might have been exposed. In the same room, Jiro Kyoka observed quietly. She loved music as much as she loved hero work, played many instruments, and had a good voice. Her favorite genres were metal and rock, and she suspected that the 7 boys sounded like a rock band. She had wanted to confirm her hunch but had not found the courage to ask. Students of Class 1A arrived one by one. At 8:30, Aizawa entered and began homeroom. He praised their battle training from the previous day and noted he had reviewed video clips and scores. Then he paused and announced that they needed to choose a class president. The class relaxed at the return to ordinary school matters and erupted with candidates. Kirishima immediately volunteered. Kaminari, Jiro, Aoyama, Ashido, Mineta, and others also raised their hands, with Iida raising his highest. Shoto and Shinso found the whole exercise dull. A brunette student suggested voting, and Iida enthusiastically supported the idea. Aizawa agreed, indifferent as always, and settled back down. The class held a vote. Izuku received 7 votes and became class president. Yaoyorozu Momo received 4 votes. Several classmates Jiro Kyoka, Ajui Tu, Ojiro Mashireo, Kaminari Denki, Shiro Hanta, Kirishima Ijiro, Tokoyami Fumikage, Mineta Minoru, Satoru Kido, Kuda Koji, Ashido Mina, Shoji Mezu, Aoyama Yuga, and Hagakure Toru each received 1 vote. Izuku coldly declared that he intended to confront some people, his eyebrows twitching in annoyance. He had an idea who had voted for him. 6 of them were most likely his friends, and the other was Shinso. Izuku had voted for Yaoyorozu Momo because he had seen how intelligent she was during the battle exercise. Iida felt a flash of frustration at having received no votes. Izuku studied the board and noticed that Iida and Uraraka's names were missing. He realized they had not voted for themselves but had instead supported Yaoyorozu. Bakugo mocked Izuku by insisting he would be class president. One of the students made an offhand joke about harshly punishing someone. Aizawa stirred awake and smirked as he asked who Izuku intended to confront. Izuku grinned widely and answered that he had 6 people in mind. Aizawa thought privately that he liked Izuku and the purple-haired student, but he shook his head and said that he would not allow any violence. As Aizawa looked over the election results on the board, the students Izuku had in mind felt a chill from his glare and tensed. Aizawa announced that the president was Izuku and the vice president was Yaoyorozu. Izuku immediately protested that he would not become president. He explained that he disliked being the center of attention, dealing with unnecessary troubles, and getting involved in messy situations. He admitted that while he had strength, wits, and resourcefulness, he did not have the charm he associated with leadership. Aizawa pointed out that 7 people had voted for him. Izuku asked if he could transfer the leadership status to someone else. Aizawa, indifferent, said he did not care. Izuku considered who would be best and chose Iida. He reasoned that Iida's hero family background had given him proper etiquette and habits that Izuku lacked, and that Iida carried a natural leadership charm despite his stiff movements and loud voice. Izuku asked Iida if he wanted to be class leader. Iida blinked in confusion and then nodded slightly, accepting the proposal. Izuku agreed to transfer the status on the single condition that Iida lower his voice. Iida accepted, eyes brightening. Aizawa confirmed that Iida would be president and Yaoyorozu vice president. At Lunch Rush's cafeteria during lunch, a group of 10 students, including Shinso, Kirishima, and Kaminari, ate together in a row of tables. Kirishima asked Izuku how his quirk worked. Izuku explained that his quirk allowed him to produce fire gathered in his lungs and release it through his mouth, nose, or skin. He noted that, like every quirk, it had drawbacks. His body ran hotter than average, making him prone to headaches and fevers, and he smiled as he chewed a piece of meat from his katsudon. Kirishima and Kaminari reacted with admiration to Izuku's speed and presence during the previous day's exercise. Shinso replied that some people used styles or techniques like he and Aizawa-sensei had demonstrated. Izuku and the others nodded toward the confused duo. Kaminari asked what styles and techniques were. Shinso explained that they had been developed by the government originally to protect quirkless people, and although useful at first they had been kept from the public for over a century, according to Aizawa-sensei. Izuku elaborated that the techniques required control, physique, strength, and disciplined breathing. They had many forms, and new combinations were still being discovered. Shoto added that a millennium ago 3 brothers had created 3 sword techniques: sun, moon, and star that had become known as the primordial elements. Fire derived from sun, water from moon, and light from star. Katsuki smirked and introduced the idea of a lost neutral style, a counter to elemental techniques. Shoto confirmed that the neutral style could counter elements and that only 3 neutral styles were known, with only one capable of harnessing the neutral element directly. Shinso said he used a binding technique of the neutral style and that Aizawa-sensei had told him that, once he reached his maximum physical and technical limits, he might manifest the natural neutral element. Izuku sighed that the government had no known neutral style records. Kaminari, excited, asked what techniques they could use. Izuku answered that the 3 of them could use 8 to 9 styles and offered to name some, but declined to reveal all their secrets. Kaminari's eyes sparkled with curiosity. Izuku said he would not discuss Shoto's techniques because Shoto had not used any styles yet. He said that he, Katsuki, and another had used bearless hand style and assassin style during the previous day's exercise. Katsuki muttered that he had toppled enemies who wore ponytails. Izuku added that his first attack against an opponent named Jack had been the assassin style and that he had also developed lightless style and illusion style. He explained that his illusion style created afterimages, allowed him to strike an enemy repeatedly, and could paralyze targets if the successive strikes failed to subdue them. Kaminari exclaimed that Izuku was already formidable without quirks and wondered how much stronger he would be when combining quirks and techniques. Shoto responded that while Izuku might be powerful in strength, the trio still could not match the speed of someone known as Hawk, whose technique allowed near-light speeds. Katsuki frowned in annoyance at their inability to learn that technique. The conversation continued. Kirishima asked curiously what his technique was. Izuku explained that it was the light speed technique, derived from the light style that Vincent had used against Shinso. Shinso muttered that the technique was indeed light style. An emergency bell echoed through the school, setting off confusion. The security announcement classified the situation as a level 3 threat, indicating that someone had infiltrated the school. Juniors panicked while the second and third years understood the warning. Students stampeded from the cafeteria, restrooms, and classrooms into the hallways, pushing to get away from an unseen danger. Katsuki and the others followed the crowd, noting the fear in people's eyes. Katsuki thought it pathetic. From a window, Katsuki, Izuku, and Shoto saw a cluster of reporters who had been waiting outside the school. Izuku frowned coldly, thinking the reporters were provoking the panic with their impatience and not understanding why Kigo liked them. Katsuki and Shoto exchanged heavy sighs as the crowd continued to push them. During the commotion, class representative Iida Tenya managed to calm everyone in an awkward but effective way. His embarrassment did not bother him, and his actions earned Class 1 a measure of respect. After lunch, Class 1A returned to the classroom and complimented Iida for his handling of the situation, though the 7 deadly sins remained unimpressed. Izuku noticed one person who had been in the cafeteria earlier was now missing, and he observed another student acting nervously and anxiously. He decided to keep watching for the moment. Izuku sighed and resumed chatting with Shinso. Shoto talked with Momo, and Katsuki continued his conversation with Kirishima. A few minutes later, their teacher Aizawa returned to the classroom earlier than expected. It had been All Might scheduled class. Aizawa looked tired and announced that that day's Hero Basic class would be taught by All Might, one other teacher, and himself. Siro asked what they would be doing. Aizawa showed a card reading rescue and explained that their training would cover anything from disasters to shipwrecks. Most of Class 1A reacted enthusiastically, while a few were less interested. Kaminari asked Mina for her opinion, and Mina replied with excitement. Kirishima joined in, declaring that rescue work was the essence of being a hero and that he was eager for it. Many students began discussing the upcoming training. Izuku, Shoto, and Katsuki felt indifferent. They had been trained by the commission from ages 4 to 7 and already knew the basic do's and don'ts of rescue work, making the exercise feel redundant to them. Aizawa groaned that he was still talking and then mentioned that students could choose whether to wear their hero costumes for the training because some scenarios could limit movement. He pressed a button to open the storage cases holding their costumes, told the class that the training area was a little far so they would travel by bus, and instructed them to start preparing before walking out as if busy but actually wanting to rest. The 7 deadly sins exchanged glances and reluctantly stood up. They collected their costumes and changed in the locker room. Once everyone had equipped their hero outfits, they assembled on the P grounds where Iida was energetically giving reminders. Izuku's group, followed by Kirishima, Mina, Kaminari, and Shinso, chatted among themselves, largely ignoring Iida's persistent instructions. Shoto felt a nagging sense that something important was about to happen. Izuku and Katsuki sensed the same uneasy instinct, as if they should be prepared for the unexpected. None of them yet knew that the coming events would put their abilities to the test and mark the beginning of a legend they would create together. They boarded the bus and headed toward the training area. Inside the bus, Class 1A talked loudly, keeping Aizawa from sleeping. The students were slightly disappointed because the bus interior was not what they had expected. Iida nagged them to fall in line and take their assigned seats, but once they boarded the bus, everything else felt secondary. The green-haired young woman beside Izuku, speaking her mind as usual, said she had heard from Mina that Izuku, Shoto, and Katsuki lived in the same household with the other 4 and asked why that was. Izuku explained that there were several reasons. Jamie, Vincent, Salvio, and Jack had no parents anymore, which was the main reason they lived together. As for Kaken, Shogun, and himself, they lived with Hawks because Hawks had saved them and because they wanted to improve. Their biological parents probably thought they were dead, Izuku added with a sigh, and the mood on the bus grew suddenly heavy. Jamie laughed and asked why Izuku was looking so gloomy. The rest of Class 1A turned to Jamie, puzzled. Jack teased that the others had already coped with their parents' deaths and that the trio had joined UA to improve and maybe see their parents again, adding that they did not have the courage for that. The remark annoyed Izuku and Katsuki somewhat, though they were used to Jack's teasing and did not take it too personally. The atmosphere lightened afterward and conversation picked up. Kirishima, sitting beside Azui, asked what they meant by joining UA to meet their parents. Izuku answered that they were not actively looking for their biological parents and that they were already satisfied with Hawks as their guardian. He felt complicated about the idea of meeting their biological parents. Even if they exposed the names their parents had given them, Katsuki, Shoto, and Izuku were unsure how to react. They had no clear emotional connection with their biological parents. They had not experienced parental love, and Hawks had been with them since the incident 11 years ago involving Lady Nagant. Mina cheerfully suggested forgetting that topic for now and steered the conversation toward something livelier. She asked how the 7 of them had become so strong and commented that their quirks and techniques looked flashy enough to make them famous heroes just by appearance. Shoto replied matter-of-factly that they trained harder. Mina frowned and pushed further, asking how they trained, since Izuku was the most conversationally normal member of the group. Shoto tended to be frank and flat, Katsuki was loud and easily annoyed, Vincent was quiet, Jack flirted, and Jamie and Salvio were straightforward like Shoto. Izuku admitted they trained almost every day. Recently Hawks had insisted on at least one day of rest, so they had adjusted their schedule. They trained each other and practiced combat with Hawks or sparred among themselves. Kirishima asked when they had started training. Izuku explained that he, Kaken, and Shogun had begun training at the age of 4 with the commission under Hawks and another mentor. At 7, they went to America on a mission and met the 4 others, who had just started training then. From that point, they trained together to improve. Kirishima thought it was amazing that the commission had trained them and noted it was not surprising given how impressive their quirks looked. Izuku chuckled softly and reflected that after the incident 11 years ago they would not be the people they were now if things had been different. Katsuki snorted that if they had not been trained Izuku would probably be a nerd. Shoto nodded in agreement and the other members giggled. Izuku gave a slight intimidating smile that made a few classmates and even the driver sweat nervously, though it was more playful than threatening. Aizawa cleared his throat to get everyone's attention and warned that they would arrive in several minutes, telling the sleepy ones to wake up and everyone to stop messing around. He spoke sternly despite being taken aback by Izuku's earlier expression. Izuku frowned, then let the intense expression fade, closed his eyes, and took a steadying breath. The class noticed the change and relaxed. Aizawa thought the class might be more troublesome than he had expected, mentally marking Izuku as a potential problem child and Katsuki as a chaotic one, though there was a reluctant fondness for some of them. He felt some fondness for Vincent and Shoto as well, but did not want to show a favorite and risk making his adopted son, Shinso, jealous. Aizawa told the driver they had arrived. The driver opened the door, and the class spilled out. As usual, Iida scolded them for inappropriate behavior. Class 1A stood momentarily speechless at the sight of the large building before them. The 7 were unsurprised in awe. They had seen larger structures and knew that America generally surpassed Japan in architecture and technological development, so the building was impressive but not overwhelming to them. They had not expected UA to fund this building. Katsuki smirked and remarked that the school's reputation was well earned as he stared at the controlled chaos before them. Izuku and Shoto whistled quietly and watched their new friends laugh together, both admitting inwardly that the sight felt warm and familiar. The hero in a literal spacesuit, whom Izuku recognized as Space Hero number 13, announced that they had been waiting. Izuku knew him as a well-known rescue hero who emphasized disaster relief. Uraraka shrieked with excitement and declared her admiration for No. 13 shrugged off the reaction, aware that Aizawa might be annoyed, and invited them to go inside. The students, excluding the Sins, bowed and asked 13 to take care of them. Aizawa, 13, and the class entered the dome-like facility, which revealed a panoramic array of training scenarios. Kirishima gaped and compared it to Universal Studios. 13 chuckled and explained that the facility contained shipwrecks, mudslides, fires, storms, and more, built to prepare for accidents and disasters. It was called the Ultimate Simulation Joint, or USJ. Aizawa asked where All Might was. 13 whispered that All Might had used up most of his power on his way to work and was resting. Aizawa frowned, muttered that it was illogical, decided to take precautions, and told the students they would begin. He positioned himself beside 13 to block him from the students' sight. 13 began a long preface as he explained his abilities. 13 explained that his quirk, Black Hole, could SCK in matter and reduce it to ash. He emphasized that such powers, used carelessly, could kill, and reminded the students that many quirks carried the potential for great harm. He compared what they had already seen in physical tests and battle training to the dangers of uncontrolled power, then made clear that this lesson would focus on using quirks to rescue people. He urged them to remember that their abilities existed to save, not to hurt. The class felt inspired. The Sins, however, carried the weight of past mistakes in their case. Lives had been lost because of errors during missions, and their mental state had been fragile afterward. Aizawa began to give instructions, but the lights suddenly dimmed. Izuku, Shoto, and Katsuki shivered as everyone turned to the fountain in the middle of the US. A black, misty portal opened. A hand emerged first, followed by a man with bluish hair and red eyes in ragged dark clothing, a twisted hand partially obscuring his face as he stepped through. Aizawa ordered everyone to stay together and instructed 13 to protect the students. Kirishima stared at the portal and the figure with growing unease and asked what it was. Several unsettling, malicious figures materialized beside the bluish-haired man. Some students wondered aloud if this was part of the exam, but Izuku recognized them and became serious. Shoto, Katsuki, Jamie, Vincent, Jack, and Salvio reacted the same way. They had already caught on to the danger. Izuku produced a small ball of flame in his hand and sighed helplessly, informing the class that those were real villains. Ironically, just as rescue training was about to begin, a dangerous event was unfolding. The class stared at the villains in terror. It was their first time facing something like this. The bluish-haired leader, his hands covering parts of his face and arms, taunted that All Might, the symbol of peace, was absent and asked whether he would come if a child were harmed. Izuku focused past the leader to a large, black creature at his side. The creature had a bird-like beak and an unsettling, unnatural appearance that made the trio feel sick. They had a vague, troubling sense of familiarity with the creature but could not place it. Aizawa pulled up his capture weapon and hid his eyes with his scarf to prevent enemies from knowing his target. He readied his gear and braced himself. Izuku stared at the bluish-haired villain and wondered aloud who they were dealing with, sensing familiarity but unable to identify the threat. There seemed to be a unique connection between him and the villain. Kirishima reacted in disbelief, asking if they were really villains and calling them foolish for breaking into a hero school. Izuku coldly observed that they were not stupid. They had infiltrated without being sensed and had clearly prepared the invasion beforehand. Momo asked 13 whether the trespassing sensors around UA grounds, buildings, forests, and other infrastructure were working properly. 13 confirmed that they were. Shoto reasoned that either only those intruders had appeared or the entire school had been targeted. In any case, the attackers must have had someone capable of bypassing the alarms. He pointed out that the class had only started 4 days ago and there was limited information about the students of Class 1A, so it would be a mistake to underestimate them. He added that the villains must have known teachers would be present and could be relying on someone escaping to alert reinforcements. Most worrying, Shoto concluded, was that the invaders were clearly looking for All Might and must have prepared something specifically to deal with him. Aizawa ordered number 13 to start evacuating and to call the school, warning that the villains might interfere with the alarm signals. He instructed Kaminari to use his quirk to make a call. Vincent asked whether Aizawa would fight alone and suggested Eraserhead's typical method of erasing quirks and then capturing enemies, but Aizawa replied that heroes needed more than one trick and stepped forward, telling number 13 to take care of the students. Aizawa jumped from the staircase, gripping his binding weapon and heading toward the enemy. He used his quirk to erase transformation and emitter-type quirks to disrupt the villain's coordination. When one of the villains lunged, Aizawa restrained him and turned the captive into a tool for close combat. Izuku smirked inwardly, impressed that Aizawa could use his weakness strategically. He had not expected such skill from someone considered an underground pro hero. Some students wanted to fight, but upon seeing Aizawa engage the invaders, they stepped back and let him handle it. Number 13 led the students toward the exit but found their path blocked by a spreading black mist. 2 large yellow eyes appeared within it, and the misty figure declared that it would not let them leave. On the battlefield, Aizawa sensed that the misty figure had teleported toward number 13 and the students. He noted that the most dangerous-looking one had slipped away in an instant and kicked toward the enemy, intending to reach number 13 and the students, but the other villains closed in and used their quirks to hold him back. The misty figure introduced the League of Villains and proclaimed that they had infiltrated UA to bring an end to All Might's era as the symbol of peace. Izuku prepared his quirk silently, confirming to himself that All Might was indeed the target. The misty villain mentioned that it had heard All Might was supposed to be here and implied that it had come for a specific purpose. Number 13 opened his fingers to use his quirk, but Bakugo acted impulsively and charged forward. Kirishima moved to support him, and the two attacked. Kirishima used hardening to slice at the enemy while Bakugo detonated, creating a cloud of smoke that obscured the misty figure. Izuku was annoyed because number 13 had been about to act. Kirishima scowled and dared the villains, and when the smoke cleared, the misty figure appeared unhurt, muttering that the situation was dangerous. The villain acknowledged the students as gifted and targeted them. Sensing an imminent strike, number 13 ordered Bakugo and Kirishima to move away. The misty villain declared its intent to scatter and eliminate them, and then used a black quirk to envelop the class. The students' quirks and Vincent's attempts to interfere had no effect. The entire class was swallowed by the black mist and rendered unaware of one another. Suddenly Izuku found himself launched into the air and falling toward water. Using his lightless-style air dash, he landed on a nearby boat. Shinso was already there, and Tsuyu and Mineta surfaced from the water as well. Izuku checked on them and saw that the three nodded with relieved smiles. Izuku noted to himself that the villain's quirk appeared related to connecting 2 spaces, and he felt relieved to have Shinso and Tsuyu with him, though he remained uncertain about Mineta's presence. Shinso groaned and wondered where they were. Izuku informed them that they were in the shipwreck disaster area, the water zone. The 3 watched Izuku's expression, and Tsuyu asked what they should do. She warned that their situation looked bad. Izuku explained that the villains had known UA's schedule and that the press trespass earlier must have been a setup to gather information, confirming Shoto's assessment that the attackers had prepared for this. He rubbed his temple and considered their options. Mineta protested that there was no way the villains could kill All Might and insisted that All Might could defeat them easily by himself. Tsuyu countered that the villains must have planned this carefully because they believed they could succeed, and she worried aloud about whether All Might could survive such an attack. Her words frightened Mineta. Mineta stammered, calling out for Izuku and Shinso. Mineta panicked and asked what was wrong with her. Before Izuku could respond to Mineta's frantic tone, they heard water moving nearby, like someone swimming with purpose. Izuku acknowledged that Tsuyu's observations had been correct but added that one thing was not true. He stepped forward, assessing the villains whose quirks were advantaged by the water, then turned to Shinso, Tsuyu, and Mineta and declared that they were wrong about not surviving. They would fight with everything they had against the villains, and he allowed himself a confident smirk. As Izuku spoke with Tsuyu, Shoto and Jack handled the villains in the landslide zone efficiently, freezing incoming attackers with precise control. Shoto's cold stare conveyed his contempt for opponents who underestimated the students. Katsuki, with Kirishima in the destruction zone, was also holding his own against the villains. In the mountain zone, Kaminari, Vincent, Yaoyorozu, and Jiru braced for an incoming confrontation. In the fire zone, Ojiro was the only one visible, doing his best to counter the attackers. In the storm zone, Tokoyami, Salvio, and Koda found themselves surrounded and were working to break free. Number 13, Iida, Shuji, Uraraka, Mina, Satu, and Siro formed a tight defense against the misty villain, and Iida's quick decisions kept them from being caught. Aizawa held off the larger crowd of enemies and had already defeated most of them. Jamie was nowhere to be seen alongside Aoyama and Hagakure. Iida asked Shuji to check whether everyone was present. Shuji reported that the students were scattered but all still in the building, and a collective sigh of relief passed through them at that news. Siro muttered with a curse and a frown that they could not hit the villain, because the villain warped things, making this one of the worst quirks to encounter. That warping was the reason Shinso and Kirishima's quirks seemed ineffective. The villain's mist-like presence prevented contact, and it felt like fighting against the wind. Number 13 thought for a moment and then addressed Iida as class president. Iida answered affirmatively. Number 13 proposed that Iida should run to the school to report the situation. The alarms were down and phones were disconnected, and the infrared alarm system had not been restored despite Eraserhead's efforts to erase quirks, likely because someone with an interrupting ability was hiding nearby. It would be faster for Iida to deliver the message in person than to search the area. Iida hesitated, arguing that as class president he could not just leave his classmates, but Sata stepped forward and urged him to go to the exit where alarms could still be heard. Siro added that the students would not be able to follow Iida and urged him to use his legs to cut through the fog. Number 13 pleaded with Iida to use his quirk to save them. The plea carried the seriousness of the battlefield. With only two pro-heroes engaged, one dealing with hundreds of villains and the other protecting students, there was no time for hesitation, and Aizawa was already showing signs of fatigue. Uraraka offered to support Iida as she had in the cafeteria, recalling how she had lifted him to calm the crowd before, and she encouraged him to do it again. Iida steadied himself, nodded, and activated his engine quirk. The villain answered by slamming a wave of mist toward number 13 and the students, claiming that forming a plan in front of an enemy was foolish. Number 13 responded that they did not mind the villain knowing. Then number 13 used his black hole ability, curling an index finger to draw the mist inward and neutralize the immediate threat. The students seized the opening and moved with coordinated, high-energy effort, turning the chaotic assault into a dynamic, anime-style exchange that emphasized agility and teamwork rather than gore. In the water zone, Mineta yelled that the villains had claimed they could kill All Might and accused Izuku of not making sense. Izuku felt anger toward Mineta and briefly considered knocking him out, but he knew an unconscious Mineta would only become a heavy burden. Mineta was crying, pleading for them to give up. Shinso muttered that the villains were likely expecting combat in the water and noted that his brainwashing quirk was still limited to a single target, with only potential for improvement. Mineta snapped for attention, still panicked. Izuku observed that the villains must have chosen their team with the facility in mind and explained that Tsuyu's frog-like quirk would have more advantages in the water. Tsuyu agreed that if the villains had known her quirk, they would have sent her to the fire zone instead. Izuku reasoned that the assailants might not know their quirks, which explained why the students had been scattered. He advised keeping their quirks hidden to avoid revealing his true strength, especially if the villain leader was watching. A large hand made of water struck the boat. Izuku reacted instantly, activating Burning Shield and then using Absorb to blunt the impact. He kept the release aspect of his power carefully concealed. He thought inwardly that, between those abilities, he had 3 quirks in his arsenal. If he had failed to block the strike, the boat might have split and sunk. A man with a skull-like face boasted arrogantly about the attack. Izuku assessed the villain's quirk as strong. Shinso commented on how powerful the ability was, and Mineta trembled with fear. In a panicked attempt to help, Mineta tried to use his quirk but stopped when Izuku and the others held their composure. The villains maintained a cautious distance from Mineta's power. One villain announced that they would sink the boat first, confident that the students would lose in the water. Mineta pressed his back against the metal wall and agreed that the situation looked dire. Tsuyu asked Mineta if he had truly enrolled to become a hero, and Mineta angrily dismissed her. He cursed the situation and lamented the loss of ordinary teenage experiences. Izuku claimed to have already heard the sound of victory and then outlined a plan, which left Tsuyu, Shinso, and Mineta confused but attentive. A villain nearby sneered at their hesitation and used a thorny quirk to pierce the boat's hull. The thorns tore through the base and water began to flow in. The boat slowly started to sink as the villain laughed triumphantly. The skull-headed villain warned his ally that Shigaraki had said not to let their guard down and reminded them that they could not judge by age but by quirks. He insisted that, with their abilities, they held the advantage in the water. Izuku stood at the edge of the boat and allowed a small smile. He found the situation unexpectedly interesting. He pushed himself upward to the highest altitude he could reach and launched his plan. With a single, precise motion, Izuku channeled his strength into a focused wave of force he called wave style, butterfly effect, a technique that used minimal movement to create a large, centralized impact. Izuku signaled to Shinso and Tsuyu. Tsuyu leaped while holding Mineta, using her tongue to secure Shinso around her waist. Shinso responded by deploying his binding scarf and looping it around Izuku to steady him. Frustrated with his own fear, Mineta resolved to act. He gathered his courage and activated his quirk, releasing it into the water. The effect began like a single droplet striking a large basin. The initial pressure spread across the surface and then drew inward. As Izuku's wave forced the villains together at the center of the disturbance, Mineta's sticky spheres adhered to them and prevented movement. The villains were rounded up and immobilized, unable to disengage from one another. Tsuyu expressed delight at how they had cleared the first hurdle. She praised her new friends for their quick thinking and teamwork, pleased to have overcome the initial threat together. The 4 of them landed still within the water zone. Izuku massaged his hands, feeling the ache left by the imperfect technique he had used earlier. It carried the drawback of muscle pain. He had no strength-related quirks in active use besides Dragon Wings and Dragon's Blessing, which he could not reveal in front of his classmates. Fortunately, his Ultra Regeneration worked passively and was already repairing the damage. He had not used his quirk earlier because fire would have died in the water, and increasing the temperature would have affected Tsuyu, who was sensitive to such changes. He relied on wave style, the most adaptable option for every environment. His other styles, Bearless, Assassin, Lightless, and Illusion, could not produce the kind of force they needed. Shinso wondered how Izuku had known that he could only brainwash one person at a time. While explaining the plan, Izuku had initially intended to include Shinso's quirk, but then had noted his own inability to command complex brain activity with current strength. Shinso had not shown weakness in battle aside from physical stamina and technique, so the insight puzzled him. Tsuyu suggested that they think of their next step. Hitoshi replied that calling for help was the priority and that they should stay near the water and exit while avoiding the plaza. Tsuyu added that Mr. Aizawa seemed to be keeping most of the enemies contained within the plaza. Izuku proposed that they leave stealthily and they started moving. Landslide zone. Jake mocked the attackers, his voice heavy with ridicule. Shoto stepped forward toward the frozen enemies. noting coldly that the others seemed unfamiliar with using their quirks properly. Jack had been the one to freeze the crowd. He was strong enough to incapacitate many at once. Shoto remembered the pale blue-haired man's speech after emerging from the portal, and suspected the crowd had been brought to outnumber them. He and Jack sidestepped a sneak attack. Shoto caught the weapon and froze it with the attacker. He judged that most of the crowd were expendable pawns rather than true threats and concluded there were only a few genuinely dangerous opponents. Shoto warned a restrained villain that remaining frozen would leave him incapacitated and that, as heroes, they wanted to avoid causing unnecessary harm. He and Jack used their ice quirk to hold the villain in place and demanded to know the basis of his plan against All Might, trying to extract information without escalation. Mountain Zone. Kaminari ran circles while Jairu and Yaoyorozu defended with their equipment, and Vincent used the blunt side of his sword to strike at assailants. Yaoyorozu suggested they find an exit. Kaminari begged for a weapon. Jairu reminded him that he was an electric user and suggested he use that ability. Kaminari protested that he couldn't control electricity well and that trying might harm his teammates. He admitted he was relying on the others. Jairu made a sharp noise and challenged his resolve. When a villain swung at Kaminari, he dodged and Jairu kicked the attacker into the enemy group, prompting Kaminari to touch the target and deliver a controlled shock. Kaminari declared that it was working and urged his teammates to rely on him. The shock forced the attackers back long enough for Yaoyorozu to create a thick insulating sheet. Vincent took cover as Yaoyorozu's plan took effect. Kaminari concentrated and released a powerful burst of electricity that coursed through the ground and disrupted the enemy formation. The villains were knocked back or stunned by the surge. During the scuffle, Yaoyorozu's clothing was damaged, but she quickly adjusted herself and continued. She reassured her teammates and prepared to contribute more. Aizawa fought through a crowd of villains and was visibly fatigued after battling so many. The blue-haired leader dashed toward him, counting seconds as he advanced. Aizawa threw his binding scarf at the foe to regain control, and a tense exchange of moves followed as both measured each other's timing. Izuku, Hitoshi, Mineta, and Tsuyu watched from the edge of the plaza and hoped Aizawa might be able to defeat the leader. Their relief turned to concern when the leader's attacks gained ground. His power began to wear on Aizawa and the veterans started to show signs of struggle. The leader taunted Aizawa about his weakening condition. Despite the pressure, Aizawa gathered himself. His hair rose as he activated his erasure and temporarily disabled the leader's quirk, creating an opening to punch and pull away. The leader fell back, and Aizawa retreated a few meters, sheltered by other minor assailants as he sought to regroup. But even with his injured right elbow, he could still use his other arm. He thought his elbow was crumbling and began playing defensively, already at a disadvantage as the villains surrounded him and his breathing grew heavy. Aizawa scowled at the blue-haired villain, who had been analyzing him and clearly taunting him. Aizawa noted that the quirk wasn't meant for fighting large groups for long, and the blue-haired villain scoffed that this was different from Aizawa's usual work. He was best at short fights and surprise attacks, and yet he had charged in head-on to avoid worrying his students. After taking a fall from a punch Aizawa had thrown earlier, the blue-haired man stood and continued to taunt him. Aizawa apprehended one villain, using him as an improvised weapon to push back the enemies. The captured villain complimented Aizawa, calling him cool, and then warned that he was not the real boss. Aizawa turned when he sensed a large presence behind him and saw a huge creature with an unsettling, exposed form. The creature lunged at Aizawa and struck with overwhelming force. Aizawa was driven back and hurt badly. The strike was far more powerful than anything he could handle alone. Izuku's eyes widened in disbelief at how easily the creature had overpowered Aizawa. Mineta, Hitoshi, and Tsuyu all showed fear. Hitoshi's eyes filled with tears. He wanted to shout for his father but forced himself to stay quiet so the villains would not locate them. Entrance. The Mist Man explained, admiring the black hole-like quirk that in everything and turned it to dust, and then taunted that a hero who saved people from disasters was not on par with a regular villain. He opened a portal in front of number 13's quirk and linked it to another portal behind her. The black hole effect began to affect number 13 herself, and the students watched in horror as her form began to crumble into ash. Mina rushed forward with Uraraka, tears in her eyes, but they arrived too late to stop the disintegration. Sada panicked and called for reinforcements, urging Iida to run for help. Iida hesitated, then remembered number 13's earlier plea to use his quirk to save everyone and gritted his teeth before dashing for the exit. He activated Reciproburst in his calves, pushing himself to maximum speed. A nearby villain muttered that they had forgotten a kid and were only waiting for All Might. Bringing in other teachers would complicate things. Iida felt the weight of everyone's lives on his shoulders and stood his ground until Shuji maneuvered his arms around the portal, showing that the warp could be touched and moved despite seeming intangible. Iida continued running as fast as he could, hoping his classmates would hold on until reinforcements arrived. The Mist Man moved to block Iida, growling that he would not let him out. The automatic door was closed, and Iida wondered how to get through it. The Mist Man began to envelop Iida, but Uraraka sprang into action. She grabbed a piece of metal, activated Zero Gravity, and flung the metal into the air. Seeing Uraraka's support, Iida and the Mist Man were both surprised. Uraraka noted aloud that if the villain wore the metal body, it must mean he had some physical form, and she urged Iida to go. The villain cursed as his metal body was thrown, and Iida seized the moment to force the door open. The Mist Man extended his form to follow, but Zero used his tape to capture the Mist Man's actual body, and Sada swung that body around before throwing him out into the plaza. After a struggle, Iida broke free and throttled away from USJ, heading toward UA to fetch every available teacher for reinforcement. Meanwhile, the students were still holding back the enemies. In the mountain zone, a new enemy emerged from the ground. Katsuki and Kirishima fought through the destruction zone. Shoto ran toward the plaza from the landslide area, and Ojiro was being chased through the fire zone while planning a counter. In the storm zone, Salvio, Tokoyami, and Koda slowly forced back the attackers. Izuku watched in horror as the creature pinned Aizawa and tightened its hold. He feared Aizawa could be killed. Shinso could not bear to see his adopted father's condition. Aizawa tried to use his quirk against the creature but found it ineffective. The creature overpowered him again and slammed him down with force. The blue-haired villain taunted that erasing quirks was useless against such an overwhelming opponent and that Aizawa was essentially powerless in this situation. Kurogiri reported that he had immobilized number 13 but failed to scatter all the students. One had escaped. Shigaraki, appearing nearby, criticized Kurogiri for the failure and threatened him in frustration. Then Shigaraki admitted the harsh truth. Winning against a dozen pro-heroes was impossible even for them, and the mission was essentially over. He ordered a retreat. The students reacted with shock at Shigaraki's order to withdraw. Mineta looked confused and asked if they were really going to leave. Tsuyu responded quietly. Mineta hugged Tsuyu in relief, and Tsuyu looked momentarily surprised. Mineta began to sink beneath the nearby water. Tsuyu told Izuku that she had a bad feeling, and Hitoshi agreed that he felt the same. Izuku wondered if the hostility was directed at them and how the villains had discovered their location. He suspected Mineta might have been the cause and felt annoyed. He questioned why the attackers would leave after causing so much damage, wondering if their real goal was to kill All Might and what they might be thinking. Shigaraki suddenly appeared in front of Tsuyu and declared that they would at least shatter some of the symbol of peace's dignity. Hitoshi, Mineta, and Izuku were surprised and could not react in time. Tsuyu's eyes filled with terror as Shigaraki's hand reached for her head. They all knew that without Aizawa neutralizing him, Shigaraki could disintegrate anything his hand touched. When his hand reached Tsuyu's face, she was not disintegrated. Silence fell over the villains and the students. Shigaraki turned and muttered that someone was impressive, and the students saw Aizawa's injured face as he used his quirk to counter Shigaraki. The force of the battle drove Aizawa to the ground and left him unconscious. Shinso, still frantic, tightened his grip on his binding device and glared at Shigaraki. Izuku leaped out of the water and drew his sword, striking with a piercing technique and following with a quick slashing attack. The impact created a cloud of smoke that hid their movements for a moment. When the smoke cleared, Shigaraki stood uninjured. They realized they had hit the monstrous creature instead of him. Shigaraki acknowledged their strength but dismissed them, commanding the creature to attack. The monster obeyed and surged toward Izuku and Shinso, while Shigaraki reached for Mineta and Tsuyu. Izuku and Shinso scrambled to deflect and misdirect the creature's blows, unable to withstand a full strike. Suddenly, the entrance to the United States-Japan Security Joint Training Facility burst open from an explosion. Hitoshi and Izuku were distracted and struck by the creature, which sent them slamming into a distant wall. Shigaraki ceased reaching for Tsuyu and Mineta and turned toward the source of the blast. Tsuyu called for Izuku and Shinso as she ran toward her classmates, and Mineta trailed after her, unwilling to be left alone near the villains. Nearby, Mina and Uraraka were assisting a fellow student when they heard the explosion and looked toward the opening. They and the other students saw a figure enter the facility, their hero teacher, All Might. The students reacted with relief and joy at All Might's arrival, but this time he did not smile. He descended the stairs and reassured everyone that they would be all right because he had come. He explained that he had cut short a meeting with the principal after sensing something was wrong and had run into Iida, who informed him of what had happened. Izuku and Shinso, aching from being thrown, glared at All Might for interrupting the battle with the creature, gritting their teeth as they watched him approach. They noticed that All Might's usual grin was gone. Despite years in America, they knew the hero's demeanor well. Shigaraki taunted the arriving hero, but the villains around him began to falter at the sight of All Might. The hero moved through the area with immense speed and knocked opponents aside, reaching Aizawa within moments. All Might cradled the unconscious, badly injured teacher, whose body bore the marks of the attack. Anger filled All Might as he surveyed the villains. All Might apologized softly to Aizawa and then turned his attention to Mineta and Tsuyu. He vanished from sight and reappeared beside them, taking Aizawa with him and knocking one of Shigaraki's hands away. Mineta and Tsuyu found themselves several meters from the fight and confused about how they had been moved. All Might ordered the students to head for the entrance and to help carry the injured Aizawa out, assigning them to evacuate while he dealt with the villain leaders. Mineta and Tsuyu immediately moved to obey, not wanting to waste any time. Shigaraki apologized to his father as he took the fallen hand that All Might had knocked away and placed it back on his face. He observed that All Might had struck him while saving others, noted the hero's impressive speed and how he could not quite track him, and concluded with a malicious smirk that All Might was getting weaker. Mineta hesitated, then raised the question to All Might about whether Izuku and Shinso were all right while he and Tsuyu helped escort Aizawa toward the entrance. All Might reassured Mineta with a peace sign, indicating everything was fine. Mineta looked down and nodded, and together with Tsuyu, he continued toward the exit carrying Aizawa. All Might turned his attention back to the villain and dashed forward with his arms crossed in an X, unleashing a powerful attack, Carolina Smash. Before All Might had closed the distance, Shigaraki commanded Nomu to intercept, and the black-brained Nomu stepped in front of Shigaraki, absorbing All Might's strike without visible injury. The force of the attack made clear how strong All Might's move had been, and All Might registered surprise at Nomu's durability. Nomu lunged at All Might in a grappling motion, but All Might twisted away. Observing the creature's resilience, All Might braced himself and activated One for All at full power, striking Nomu with everything he had. Nomu absorbed the blows again and again without faltering. Realizing the direct assaults were futile, All Might backed away. Nomu reappeared and the two exchanged a flurry of heavy blows. Shigaraki taunted that Nomu's shock absorption made direct damage ineffective, adding that disabling Nomu would require targeting its internal systems, which would be difficult in combat. All Might used the opening to move behind Nomu and execute a reverse suplex, the impact producing a huge burst of force that sent smoke and dust billowing around them. The students at the entrance cheered, surprised by the force All Might still commanded. As smoke drifted back, Izuku helped Shinso to his feet and studied All Might's movements, comparing them in his mind to the hero's previous peak performances. Izuku recalled that All Might had recently rescued people in 3 separate incidents, and that this series of events must be related to the signs they had seen. He furrowed his brow and focused on the battle. Shinso looked at the dispersing smoke with wide eyes, sharing Izuku's concern. Izuku concluded that All Might's weakening was connected to the way the fight was unfolding. All Might now appeared to be clutching his left side where Nomu had latched on, clearly struggling with the creature's grip. When the smoke fully cleared, Nomu and All Might were locked in a countermove created through Kurogiri's warp gate. All Might groaned under the pressure of the hold. Shigaraki mocked the idea of trapping him in concrete and noted that Nomu's power matched All Might's, praising Kurogiri for setting up the opportunity. All Might strained to free himself, trying to pull Nomu's hand away from his side but finding it stuck fast. He warned his opponents to be prepared. Kurogiri calmly outlined the plan to trap All Might inside the warp gate and then deliver a decisive blow once the hero was caught in the portal, explaining how the gate would close on its target. His tone was cold and confident. Izuku quickly instructed Shinso to go help Tsuyu's group and assist with Aizawa while he moved toward the fight. Shinso agreed, though he wondered why Izuku did not come with him. Izuku ignored the question and dashed toward Nomu, All Might, and Kurogiri, drawing his sword and taking a fighting stance. Kurogiri responded to Izuku's approach by projecting his mist to block the path and opening another portal. Before Izuku reached it, Katsuki appeared and used his explosion quirk while Izuku drove a swift, precise strike to penetrate the mist and target a vulnerable area inside Nomu. The coordinated assault disrupted Kurogiri's defenses and caused him to grunt from the impact. In the next instant, a large wave of ice froze a portion of Nomu's body. All Might recognized the freezing quirk and turned his attention to the source, Shoto and his ally, who had intervened with controlled, targeted power. Shoto had been instructed that he and his partner would be responsible for eliminating All Might if necessary, and he coldly executed his part, aiming at the enemy while avoiding undue harm to the wounded hero. Thanks to that controlled effort, All Might was able to loosen Nomu's hold and free himself, tumbling clear of the attack. Kirishima rushed in and attempted to strike Shigaraki with a hardened punch, but Shigaraki's training and reflexes allowed him to evade the blow. Kirishima groaned that he couldn't use any moves as he retreated toward Katsuki. Katsuki smirked at Kurogiri, dismissing him as a foggy extra and ordering him to stop trying to act cool. Izuku tightened his grip on his sword and coldly observed that they were weaker than any average villains. Shoto spoke in a cold, monotonous tone, asserting that the symbol of peace could not be killed by them. Jack smiled playfully and chuckled with a hint of arrogance, noting that the whole gang had not been needed. The villains fell silent as Shigaraki looked at Kurogiri and noted that their warp gate had been blocked, warning that they were in deep trouble. Katsuki accused Kurogiri of being able to phase only parts of his body into a foggy warp gate and of hiding those parts, pointing out that if physical attacks never worked on him, the warning Kurogiri once gave would not have made sense. Kurogiri grunted. Kurogiri tried to avoid Izuku's blade. Katsuki braced his hand on the metal armor and warned Kurogiri that he would trigger small explosions if he acted suspiciously, while Izuku readied his other sword and infused it with his fire-breathing quirk. Katsuki warned that he would explode Kurogiri at the slightest sign of treachery. Kirishima watched from behind and thought that Katsuki's manner was far from hero-like. Shigaraki stood still and remarked that, on top of capturing them, most of the students remained uninjured. Kids these days were strong and made the League of Villains look bad. He then ordered Nomu into action. The students recognized the creature's name as Nomu. As the ice around it shattered, the half-frozen Nomu rose, regenerating rapidly in an unsettling, unnatural way. Kirishima exclaimed that the creature was damaged but still moving, and everyone stared. All Might ordered everyone to fall back, but the 5 students ignored him, fixed on the Nomu's unnerving recovery. All Might questioned whether the creature's quirk was merely shock absorption. Shigaraki scoffed and explained that Nomu also possessed body regeneration. The trio of students Izuku, Katsuki, and Shoto sensed that they faced an engineered being with multiple quirks, designed to match a hero at full threat. Shigaraki added that Nomu had been created as a high-grade human test subject meant to fight at 100%. Everyone prepared their defensive stances except Katsuki and Izuku, who were still dealing with Kurogiri. Shigaraki ordered his team to retrieve their gate and sent Nomu forward. Nomu vanished and lunged for Izuku and Katsuki. Both students were surprised by its speed but adjusted calmly and moved to exploit their styles. Izuku used wave style, burst step, and Katsuki used explosive style, Impact maneuver to close the distance. They could not take Kurogiri with them. He slipped away, leaving two of Izuku's swords behind, lodged in his form. Izuku noted that he could not use certain styles while armed with those blades and, frowning at the lost swords, readied himself to fight bare-handed, confident that his quirk would carry him. All Might hesitated, watching the students move so quickly that he reconsidered stopping them. Then All Might challenged the villains, declaring that he was angry at a world where violence could be labeled hero or villain and that he would stop them decisively for the sake of peace. Shigaraki squinted and grinned, acknowledging that his intentions had been seen through. Shoto counted the odds as 3 against 6. Izuku readied his stance and noted that Katsuki had exposed Kurogiri's weakness. Kirishima steeled himself and sharpened his resolve with his quirk to support the heroes. All Might, however, urged the boys to retreat. Shoto argued that they had already aided All Might and could not simply run. Izuku suggested they support All Might from a distance or target the remaining villains instead, reasoning that All Might could handle Nomu but might need help with the others. Kirishima pointed out that All Might was injured, and All Might responded with a reassuring thumbs up and smile. All eyes turned to the 3 villains. Shigaraki commanded Kurogiri and Nomu to kill the heroes while he handled the students. All Might braced himself and raised his guard. Shigaraki rushed at the students to clear the fight and go home, but All Might intercepted him, dashing forward. Nomu noticed and surged to defend Shigaraki. The 2 titans collided fist to fist, producing an enormous gust of wind that sent everyone tumbling away from the impact. Shigaraki reminded All Might that the creature's quirk included shock absorption. All Might confirmed this and answered by launching a furious barrage of punches at Nomu. Their exchange intensified rapidly, the sequence of blows accelerating to an almost inhuman tempo and keeping everyone forced back from the battlefield. Shoto formed an ice shield to block the sweeping winds so the students would not be blown away. Izuku, Katsuki, and Shoto reinforced their foundations and pushed themselves to stand amid the gale. Kirishima and Jack struggled to remain on their feet under the blast's force. Jack then produced a stronger ice barrier to protect them both and signaled readiness to support the trio. The 3 students nodded to each other and dashed through the winds toward the fray. The villains found it hard to press in, Kurogiri especially feeling the strain of the turbulent field. All Might reasoned that if Nomu absorbed shocks, the creature must still have limits. He and Nomu continued to trade rapid punches until the creature managed to land a blow on All Might's injured side. All Might grimaced in pain, and Izuku and Shoto noticed the brief opening in the exchange. They rose and prepared their techniques. Izuku gathered a concentrated, focused breath of flame into his mouth for dragon annihilation while Shoto summoned a blazing spear into his fist for burning drive. Spear. Together, they released their combined assault. The concentrated fire merged midair, forming a blue, dragon-shaped spear that lunged at the Nomu. Bakugo mixed some of his nitroglycerin sweat with the flames to provoke a powerful chemical reaction. The 3 of them combined their attacks into the Heavenly Dragon Slayer. The combined strike hit the Nomu and disabled both of its arms. They all understood the Nomu's regenerative quirk, but they also understood the science. Carbonized cells would not regenerate, and the trio exchanged a confident look. All Might saw the blue fire dragon flash and seized the opportunity to strike with full force. The Nomu was sent several meters away. Katsuki and Shoto dashed through the air and drew their swords. Katsuki executed Moon Style, Moon Crescent, cutting horizontally behind the Nomu, while Shoto executed Sun Style, Eclipse with a vertical strike beside him. Their cross strikes produced a blinding cross of light that sent the Nomu down toward the ground where Izuku waited. Izuku unleashed his new wave style original form, Limitless Wave Blast combined with Absorb and Release. An intense gust of wind from his arms battered the Nomu repeatedly. Izuku realized that the wave style used his arm strength. His arms ached because he had pushed his power into a single concentrated attack. By dividing that force into several waves, he could release more than he normally could in one burst. He smiled at the realization, though the technique was still imperfect and left his arms numb. If he could complete the style, it would be far more powerful. The Nomu could not mount an effective counter. It had recovered somewhat from Katsuki and Shoto's strikes, but Izuku's waves and All Might's blows had weakened its shock absorption and hindered its arm regeneration because of the carbonized tissue at the injury sites. All Might returned to the fray and began another round of relentless, full-strength strikes. The Nomu tried to defend with its legs and remaining shoulders and elbows, but All Might's kick launched it into the air again. All Might, Katsuki, Shoto, and Izuku moved in concert. All Might spun the Nomu and slammed it back to the ground with a howitzer impact. Katsuki used his quirk to spin rapidly, building force and releasing it at the Nomu. Shoto unleashed a concentrated blue beam. Izuku and Shoto then combined a temperature-focused attack similar to the Heavenly Dragon Slayer, concentrating their heat and directing it at the grounded Nomu. The strike scorched the Nomu without vaporizing it. They deliberately held back from a final finishing move. All Might descended beside the falling figure, clenched his fist, and addressed the villains as he prepared for the final strike. He declared his mantra and then struck with everything he had, delivering a blow far beyond the trio's combined power. The Nomu erupted into the air, tearing through USJ's dome and sending shockwaves across the complex. Heroes and students across the zones felt the tremor. Salvio in the storm zone, Vincent in the mountain zone, Jamie in the fire zone, and everyone at USJ. The Nomu sped into the sky until it vanished from sight. There was a moment of stunned silence, then the plaza erupted into cheers as Tsuyu, Mineta, and Shinso made their way toward the main group. All Might joked about feeling weaker than in his youth and claimed that 5 hits used to be enough, but Izuku, Katsuki, and Shoto all sensed that he was masking how close he was to his limit. All Might warned the villains that they should end this quickly. Shigaraki trembled with fury and accused them of cheating, furious that his Nomu had been overwhelmed. Meanwhile, in the mountain zone, a villain who had been jamming the electronics rose from the ground holding Kaminari and warning the girls not to move. Jairu attempted to provoke the villain into lowering his guard so they could exploit an opening. Vincent moved silently behind the attacker, using his assassin style, undetectable. He gripped his sword and executed assassin style, backstab, knocking the villain out with the blunt side of the blade. Yaoyorozu and Momo were surprised by his sudden appearance behind the villain. Kaminari remained in his dummy state. Jairu asked Vincent when he had arrived behind the villain while she held Kaminari. Vincent explained that he had sensed the threat beforehand and had concealed himself while the others were distracted, speaking in a flat tone that made his fatigue clear. The girls, embarrassed by their earlier laughter, changed the subject and moved toward the exit. Yaoyorozu remarked that something had exploded nearby and wondered how many blasts there had been. Vincent counted the detonations, 8 large explosions and about 12 smaller ones. When Jairu asked how he knew, Vincent analyzed the patterns and directions. The first blast, he said, came from the direction of the door and probably signaled the arrival of a strong pro-hero, most likely All Might. The second was a massive explosion that likely marked the start of a major battle. The remaining large blasts were probably caused by All Might or the trio, given their power. The smaller explosions, he suspected, were caused by Katsuki operating in the nearby destruction zone. Vincent yawned and noted that there was also Jamie in the fire zone, whose combat style was related to nature. He wondered which villain had forced All Might, Izuku, Katsuki, and Shoto to use more than 20% of their power. The thugs calling themselves villains did not seem strong enough to deserve such force. Vincent stared at the plaza, broken into pieces, and decided he was going to rest. Shigaraki frowned, scratched his neck frantically, and muttered that All Might had not weakened at all. His power alone could defeat the Nomu, but the kids had made his victory certain. Shigaraki asked himself if All Might had lied. All Might squinted and prompted Shigaraki to try if he could. Izuku suspected All Might of bluffing, noticing steam coming from him, and Shoto and Katsuki also observed it. Kirishima and Jack rushed toward the others, intending to discuss how strong their earlier attack had been, but 2 main villains were still standing. All Might asked what was wrong. Shigaraki scratched his neck more frantically and said that if Nomu had been here, he would be able to attack without thinking. Kurojairi intervened calmly and told Shigaraki to calm down, pointing out that the Nomu had weakened him. Kurojairi noted that the kids were still present and there were men they could use, and that reinforcements would arrive in a few minutes. He suggested that if he and Shigaraki worked together, they still had a good chance of killing All Might. Shigaraki agreed and decided to press forward. With the 5 students nearby, they sensed the villains standing up sluggishly. Jack and Kirishima turned and prepared for combat. Izuku, Katsuki, and Shoto watched Shigaraki rush toward All Might with Kurogiri following in his wake. Shigaraki cried out that this was for the Nomu as he charged. When Shigaraki came within 5 meters of All Might, the trio stepped in front of him and threatened him with the use of their quirks. They recognized that All Might was already at his limit and probably could not take another step. Shigaraki halted and Kurogiri began to form a portal, but a sudden loud bang cut through the air. The trio immediately realized it was a gunshot. Before they could react, Shigaraki was struck by a bullet. All Might glanced toward the entrance and wondered if reinforcements had arrived. The trio and the villains looked toward the entrance as well and saw pro-hero Snipe standing there with the UA teachers. Snipe apologized for being late and explained that he had gathered all who could come. Tenya Iida announced his return as Class 1A president with a loud declaration that echoed through the USJ. Additional pro-heroes arrived from the right: Vlad King, Nizu, Cementos, Ectoplasm, Hound Dog, Midnight, Power Loader, Present Mike, and others, standing and looking down at the villains. The villains grunted in annoyance and surged toward the gathered heroes. Present Mike showed his irritation and stood beside Snipe. He inhaled and released his quirk as a large wave of sound that affected the approaching villains. Several were knocked out by the blast, while others held on. Seeing that the attack had not neutralized everyone, Ectoplasm used his quirk to produce multiple perfect clones of himself, and the clones began subduing the weakened villains. Nizu ordered the heroes to split up and find the students, and everyone nodded and leapt down into the plaza. Shigaraki frowned and declared that their arrival meant the game was over. He urged Kurogiri to retreat and return later. As Izuku prepared to dash forward, several bullets struck Shigaraki repeatedly. Shigaraki fell while Kurogiri, in his misty form, attempted to block the bullets. Snipe commented on who could catch them from that distance as he continued shooting. Number 13 weakly offered that he could help. Shigaraki and Kurogiri struggled as Shigaraki lay badly hurt. Suddenly, something pulled on Kurogiri's mist. Kurogiri recognized the force and called out no. Number 13's quirk held Kurogiri's mist, preventing him from opening a portal to warp him and Shigaraki away from the USJ. Kurogiri continued struggling and vowed that even though they had failed this time, he would kill All Might, the symbol of peace, next time. Kurogiri finally managed to pull Shigaraki into the portal, and they disappeared. At the entrance, Snipe frowned and wondered how the escape had happened. Midnight agreed that they had been caught off guard, and Vlad placed Nizu down from his shoulders while Nizu calmly instructed everyone to make sure the students were safe. Snipe and Midnight nodded and moved to carry out those orders. Back in the plaza, Shoto observed that the arrival of so many pro-heroes indicated that the whole school had likely not been attacked. The students turned their attention to All Might in his smaller form and stared in silence for several seconds, eyes widening at the reveal. Smoke around All Might obscured his body from Jack and Kirishima's view, so they had not seen this form. Katsuki stammered in disbelief. All Might chuckled softly and attempted to explain, but Kirishima and Jack called out the trio's names, causing All Might to freeze. The trio noticed his flinch and realized that this was a secret form of his. Izuku awkwardly tried to reassure his friends that they were all right, rubbing his neck with a nervous smile. Kirishima and Jack were confused for a moment, then continued toward them, only to be intercepted by Cementos. Cementos advised everyone to gather at the gate so the students could be verified safe and told them that the injured would be handled. The two students sighed but obediently returned to the entrance, trusting the trio's strength. All Might sat in exhaustion and thanked Cementos for saving him. Cementos, embarrassed, admitted he was a fan. Izuku assessed Cementos in his head and catalogued his profile. Cementos's quirk allowed him to manipulate cement like clay and made him strong in the modern world. Cementos said they would keep All Might hidden and take him to the infirmary, scolding him lightly for acting recklessly. All Might answered that if he had not acted recklessly, he might have died, and he looked at the trio with gratitude for their help. Outside the USJ 20 minutes later, police and medics arrived. A police inspector named Naomasa Tsukachi began counting the gathered students at the entrance. There were 2 ambulances that had arrived 10 minutes earlier to take Aizawa and number 13 to the hospital. The police apprehended the villains and restrained them together before loading them into the transport vehicles. Tsukachi read from the documents in his hands that everyone from 21 to 25 had been accounted for, and that while some were bruised there were no critical injuries. Hagakure approached Ojiro enthusiastically and told him she had heard he had been in the fire zone fighting alone. Ojiro replied that he had felt alone too and had survived by boxing. He then asked where she had been. Hagakure pointed to Jack and Shoto and explained that she had been in the landslide zone and had been surprised by how strong Shoto and Jack were. Ojiro smiled and said he was glad she was okay. Shoto and Jack flinched, worried that using their freezing technique on her might have been dangerous. Aoyama shone and asked several classmates where he had been sent, but Koda, Kirishima, Kaminari, Tokoyami, Siro, Shuji, and Sato were distracted talking about how incredible the trio and All Might had been, so they ignored him. He tried the Izuku group and then Tsuyu. When Tsuyu asked where he had been sent, Aoyama answered that it was top secret, and Tsuyu gave him a doubtful look before turning away. Tsukachi then informed everyone that, for the moment, the students could return to their classroom and that they would not be questioned immediately. Shinso asked about his father, visibly worried. The doctor on the phone told Tsukachi that Shinso's father had suffered multiple fractures to his arms and face but had no brain injury. There could be lasting effects around one eye due to orbital fractures. Shinso's eyes filled with tears and he began to cry quietly. Izuku went to him and hugged him to offer comfort. Mina asked solemnly about number. Tsukachi said that number 13 had been treated and stabilized. The wounds to his back and upper arms were severe but he would survive. He also reassured the students that All Might would recover, that Recovery Girl's treatment in the infirmary was sufficient. Tsukachi then told everyone again to return to their classroom, and the students complied. With that, the confrontation concluded with a mixture of victory and loss. The heroes had not captured the mastermind, Shigaraki Tamura, nor his ally Kurogiri with the warping quirk, but they had subdued the lesser villains and the Nomu found in the UA forest. The class walked down the UA hallway, talking about the ordeal they had just experienced for the first time. Despite the smiles and laughter, a thread of fear and hesitation remained in their eyes. No freshman could be expected to face the adult world without being changed by it. Izuku smiled at his classmates and nodded with satisfaction, convinced that this group was strong and had the potential to become national-level heroes. The sunset streamed through the windows as if marking the end of the beginning, the end of their ordinary lives and the start of the path toward being heroes. Izuku, Shoto, Katsuki, Jamie, Vincent, Salvio, and Jack had already faced danger at a young age, and now it felt refreshing to grow alongside peers who shared the drive to become heroes. They looked forward to the challenges to come.